So, hi ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Recchia. I'm Commissioner of the Public Service Department. I'm not sure, I'm using this microphone, but I'm not hearing anything, so I'm not sure this is working. So I'm just going to talk loudly. Can people in the back hear me okay? Of course, if you can't hear me, you don't know the question I asked. So all right, so I'm going to ask all the panelists to speak louder than normal, as well as people who are participating. We have a webinar going on as well, where some people are calling in, and we'll get to those people on the phone in a minute and see if that works. But let's start, if we could, with introductions from the panel members as to who they are, and I'll start over on my left.
Hi, Derek Jordan. I'm a citizen appointee by Speaker Shapsman.
Jim Tonkovich, appointed by Senator Campbell.
Steve Skibniowski, representing the town of Vernon.
David Andrews, representing the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers.
Jim Matto, citizen member appointed by Senator Campbell.
Good evening, Molly Kelly, State Senator representing District 10 in New Hampshire, which is right across the river and a neighbor to most of you.
Vermont, Bill Irwin, Vermont Department of Health, representing the Agency of Human Services Secretary.
Chris Campen, Executive Director, Wyndham Regional Commission, representing the Commission.
Said who I was.
David Mears, I'm the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, here as the designee for the Agency of Natural Resources.
I'm Kate O'Connor from the town of Brattleboro, and I'm a citizen member appointed by Governor Shovlin.
Chris Wamser, Site Vice President at Vermont Yankee.
Mike Toomey with Entergy. I'm one of the company's two representatives.
And Martin Langeveld, also a citizen member appointed by the governor.
Thanks very much. And on the phone, well, I have Tony Lashinsky in the corner. He's our nuclear engineer and today audio and visual engineer. And Tony, who's on the phone? And let's see if we can get introductions and make sure they can hear us and we can hear them.
Did you guys get that?
Yep, this is Pat Moulton. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. I can hear you well, and I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yeah, you can hear you well. Thank you, Pat. Anyone else on the phone?
Yeah, this is Catherine Morris with Consensus Building Institute, and I can hear you fine. I get a little bit of feedback, but it's not interfering too much.
Great, thanks, Catherine. And did David Dean or Mark McDonald or Representative
I
Peter?
don't see any indication yet that they're online.
Okay, all right, thanks. Well, we'll see if they join us. So thank you all for coming. This is the, let's see, October, November, December, January, 4th meeting of the NDCAP, the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. And I am glad to be doing this with you tonight. I'm pleased also to report, that we're going to have a presentation from the NRC on the PSDAR process. I'll introduce them in a little bit. But right now, we have to do review and approval of the December minutes. So I wonder if I may have a motion on those minutes. So moved by Jim and seconded by Stephen. Thank you, guys. Any discussion or corrections? Jim, sorry.
I don't have any corrections, but I have a couple of questions about them. Is this the time you want that, or later?
Sure, let's try them.
Okay, one was a committee was formed to look into issues and to contact other sites in other parts of the country to look into some issues about resources that they have and are using. And I just wondered if that committee has met.
Right. I don't believe it has.
It's you and me.
It's you and me, and was Kate on that one too? Or was that,
and Commissioner Mears.
Great. No, we have not met yet.
And here you are all together.
We are all here.
Do we have to warn this meeting?
There's still room if you want to join the
No.
Okay, Jim.
Okay, and one of the one of the things related to the resources was that Senator McDonald suggested that the panel ask the legislature for funding. And so I was going to ask you, but you haven't mentioned, you haven't talked about that. Maybe that can come up later on.
No, but I think when we talk about the governance and charter and comments to the legislature, we can talk about that.
My other question relates to a series of thoughtful questions that Dr. Irwin had, and there was going to be a response to that, although I remember Mike has said it wouldn't happen until after the holidays. We're just wondering if there's been a response to those questions yet.
We are still working on the documents. There was a lot of activity at the site related to the cessation of operations and the other work that Chris will talk about. But I talked to Joe Lynch, who's responsible for putting those comments together, or the responses together, and I think we'll have those by at least mid-February.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so those are all the questions on the minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes themselves? Yeah, Bill.
Just one correction on the third page, the last bullet on the page. There are 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth sub-bullet under that last, there's it says using classifications as they are. They should only be 1, 2, 3, not 4.
Very good. Everyone see that? Fourth sub-bullet up from the bottom of page 3. There's classifications 1, 2, and 3, not 4. Make that correction. With that correction, are there any other changes or suggestions? Yep.
The bottom of page 3, talking about the low-level waste compact commission meeting that were in the state of Vermont. Chairman Recchi indicated to contact the compact commission to see whether one of those meetings could be held in this geographic area. Has that been performed?
It has not yet been performed. And I just want to make sure we read that as, we have had meetings in the state, but not in Windham County. Is that how everybody reads that? Okay, so we'll pursue that, but that discussion has not occurred yet. Okay, so if there are no other further changes or amendments to the minutes, I'll take a vote on them with the one change that we have, eliminating the number 4 in the end of the fourth sub-bullet on page 3. All those up, Bill?
I'm sorry. The last couple of comments made me wonder whether it would be useful in the minutes or at some point in the proceedings to capture action items. Those were a couple of things that were pointed out that people might follow up on. It might be easier to see those action items if they're specifically highlighted in the minutes.
They could be, and that definitely goes beyond what the minutes are supposed to say, but there's no harm in doing that. So I think that's a fair question. Okay, with that, I'll take a vote. All those in favor of the minutes as amended, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Any abstentions? Okay, the minutes are done.
Chris?
Yes.
I just have an agenda question. I saw on the Entergy document site that the State Attorney General had filed in docket 50-2071, Entergy's pre-notice of disbursement from decommissioning trust. Can we just shoehorn a couple minutes there for the state to kind of talk about what's going on?
Maybe. I think we probably can towards under the discussion of state agency comments, maybe.
Okay.
We can certainly try and do that. But I think, yeah, the agenda is pretty full right now, but suffice it to say there are things going on, and I'd be happy to try and summarize them if we can. Thank you. Any other comments? Actually, I skipped over an overview of the agenda, but Are there any comments on the agenda itself?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I won't.
Speak loudly, though.
I'm sorry for that. And I think, I don't want to keep the NRC from doing their presentation, but I'm hoping that maybe when we get down to the public comments of the emergency planning, if I can just ask a process question at that point that came up because I saw this on the agenda. I don't want to harp on it, but we'll just get down there.
Understood.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually have the same concerns about the process through which items are being added to the agenda, the extent to which panel members are being consulted. But I agree we should not postpone the NRC presentation. So I'll discuss that when that comes up.
All right, we'll take that up before we take that issue up on the agenda. Appreciate that. Okay, so on that note, we have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission here, and Drew Persinko, who's the Deputy Director of NRC headquarters. They're going to make a presentation on the PSDAR process, and then we'll have discussion among the panel, and then open it up for questions from the audience. But I do want to emphasize that the NRC is here to talk about process, not any of the substance of what has been submitted. So I just want to make that point. But Drew, thanks very much for joining us and for your crew coming from King of Prussia as well as other places. So thanks.
Thank you. Can you hear me? No?
You
have to turn that on.
Is it on?
Where is? Hold on. There's up here. How's that? Yeah, you got it.
Got it? Yes.
Yeah, okay, and there's a volume switch over here to add a little more volume.
Is everybody okay? Can you hear me fine? It's
Yeah,
too loud?
that's good, Drew. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Recchia. My name is Andrew Persinko. I'm a Deputy Division Director in the Division of Decommissioning, Uranium Recovery, and Waste Programs. And in my division, I'm responsible for decommissioning both reactors and material sites. I also have several other folks here from NRC, and I just would like to have them introduce themselves.
Yeah. I'm Bruce Watson, Chief of the Reactor Decommissioning Branch.
Sarah Rich, I'm the Senior Resident Inspector at Vermont Yankee.
Good evening, I'm Mark Furtis. I'm Chief of our Decommissioning and Technical Support Branch in our Region 1 office.
All right, I'm Doug Tift. I'm the State Liaison Officer in the NRC Region 1 office.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panel for inviting us to speak today on the decommissioning process, which includes the PSDAR. As you can see, this is the agenda for our presentations today. Let me start off, first of all, it really starts with the NRC mission. This is our mission. We regulate the civilian use of radioactive materials to protect public health and safety, promote the common defense and security, and protect the environment. This was our mission during the operation of Vermont Yankee. This is our mission during the decommissioning of Vermont Yankee. I just want to say something about some future meetings. So everybody knows, on February 5th, we'll be hosting a webinar where we'll again talk about the reactor decommissioning process if folks want to call in and register for that. So, and the other meeting we're having is it's a public meeting for the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report. And that's always a mouthful. So you're going to hear that from the rest of the night being referred to as the PSDAR. And so we don't use lingo and we don't like to use acronyms too much, but PSDAR is much more manageable than saying that all the time. So the PSDAR public meeting is going to be held on February 19th. We had planned originally to have it in the end of January.
Today, actually.
Yeah, right. That's right. It was today, actually, in this room. But we moved it at the request of the panel to a later date. So we chose February 19th. Let me say, at that meeting, the purpose of that meeting is really twofold. Part of it is informational. At that meeting, we'll have other NRC technical specialists in attendance as well. We will give some informational presentations, as well as Entergy will also give a presentation at that meeting about the future actions at what's in the PSDAR. And more importantly at that meeting, the purpose is to solicit comments, to solicit public comments at the meeting about the PSDAR. Let me back up there. Before I turn it over to Bruce, I just want to say a couple of things. I just want to note that the current power, Bruce is going to talk about the decommissioning process in depth. I just want to note that the current power reactor decommissioning process came into being in 1996 by regulation. The regulations were revised back in 1996 to incorporate prior decommissioning experience. The rule that's currently in effect went through the normal rulemaking process, which included solicitation of public comments and the resolution of those comments. That process has been used successfully to decommission 7 power reactors, including 3 here in New England. The decommissioning at Vermont Yankee will be carried out the decommissioning oversight by the NRC at Vermont Yankee will be carried out consistent with our regulations to achieve the objectives that I stated in the first slide when I spoke about our mission, i.e. protecting public health and safety and protecting the environment. So with those introductory remarks, then I would like to turn it over to Bruce Watson, who will talk about the decommissioning process, which includes the PSDAR, in more detail.
Well, thank you all for showing up tonight, and I appreciate your spending the time away from your families and time to be here to hear us talk tonight. I did leave some brochures and also on decommissioning over on the table, and also there's a copy of our Federal Register notice that has that lengthy link on it, so you can hopefully get to the webinar if you choose to. A couple words about the basis of our regulations. Congress gave us the authorization to regulate atomic energy in 1954, and we are the independent safety regulator for the civilian use of radioactive materials in the U.S. So we are an executive agency, and we report up through the presidential chain. As Drew said, we have a number of regulations that were developed in 1996 and implemented in 1997. One of those was the license termination rule, which establishes the dose requirements for the termination of license. We also put in the decommissioning process in Part 50 for the operating reactors, and also in Part 5075 there's a section on planning for decommissioning. Specifically in 5082, there's a section on license termination. There's basically a 4-step process. Basically, the licensee certifies that they permanently shut down, and that they have permanently defueled, which then negates their ability to operate the plant forever. In order to operate the plant, they'd have to reapply for a license. Within 2 years of that shutdown, they're required to submit to us the post-shutdown decommissioning activities report, and also to us, and also all the permanent cessation of operations that they have to provide it to us and to the affected states. And then the last document they will produce at the end of the decommissioning cycle or process is the license termination rule. License termination plan. Our experience in 1997, as Drew said, we successfully decommissioned 7 power reactors. We've decommissioned over 45 complex material sites and 14 research reactors. And in reality, we have terminated the licenses on 10 power reactors, so I'd say we have some experience at doing this type of work. Keep in mind that we continue to evolve our guidance, to keep improving it, and along with our inspection program. As defined in 50.2, decommissioning remains to remove a facility or site safely from service and reduce the residual radioactivity to meet the levels that permit either the release of the property for unrestricted use and termination of the license, or restricted use and termination of the license. All of our license terminations to date, all the power reactors, all the research reactors, and all the material sites had their licenses terminated for unrestricted use. So in other words, the land that was associated with that site can be used for whatever purpose the owner chooses to do. So some plants turn them into parks, some turn them into, to build additional generating facilities on them. It's really up to the licensee or the owner of the property to do what they want to with the property. Once we terminate the license, we are now finished with any regulatory responsibilities to the site. For unrestricted release, our residual dose limit is less than 25 milligram per year, and that does not include natural background. We look at it from a variety of pathways, all pathways actually, and look at the average person, member of the critical group who's going to receive that dose. 25 milligram sounds like a lot, but in comparison to the anywhere from 300 to 600 milligram a person living on the planet will receive in the course of natural background, it's a small percentage. However, I want you to know that the reactors that had been decommissioned and had their licenses terminated have been a very small fraction of the 25, along the lines of a few milligram per year. So it's basically indistinguishable from background, however it may be very difficult to measure. We have not had any sites license terminated for restricted use. However, it is in the regulations. The reactor decommissioning regulations are performance-based, risk-informed regulations. They presently require that the reactor decommissioning be completed in 60 years. And by that, I mean the radiological decommissioning, the part that the NRC oversees. We do not require the final end state of the site. Once the site demonstrates to us that they meet the dose criteria for have the license terminated, then we will terminate the license, whatever that situation is. We do not require greenfield. That is a responsibility of others, either with the state or the stakeholders. The basis for that 60 years is that while the plant is in 50 years of safe store and then 10 years to complete the decommissioning, the radiation dose rates will be reduced to about 1 to 2% of what they were when the plant was finished, permanently ceased operations. So there's a significant safety savings there from a dose perspective to the workers who will disassemble the plant. And it's also postulated that the volumes of radioactive waste will be reduced by about 10% also because of radioactive decay. During this time period, it also allows the decommissioning funds to increase. And if you want more information on this process, you can look at Reg Guide 1.184, which is available on our public website. Well, what is the purpose of the PSDER? It is to provide us with information, strategic pieces of information on the plans that the licensee has for the decommissioning. It is not a federal regulatory action. It is not a license amendment or exemption or anything else. The reason for that is because the decommissioning activities are already covered under the safety envelope which the plant was operated on. So they can continue to decommission, they can start into decommissioning once certain regulatory requirements are met because they're already within the safety envelope of the operating license. Okay. There's currently 3 strategies for decommissioning in our guidance. One is decon, or prompt dismantlement, safe store, or sometimes called deferred dismantlement, or entomb. To date, we do not have any regulations for entomb. We do not plan on issuing any, and no licensees have ever spoke to us about entombment. However, I can tell you that in the defense complex, the Department of Energy has done some entombment work. Okay, so, but it's not in the commercial world. There are many factors to consider in the decision-making in that process on the strategy, which include a lot of the things you've discussed here. Financial, availability of waste facilities, a number of different factors, what the stakeholders desire, etc. The content of the PSDR is basically three things. It's a description and schedule of the planned decommissioning activities. This is very important to the NRC so we can schedule our resources to continue to inspect the plant to ensure that the work is going to be done safely. One of the points I really want to make sure you understand is that just because the plant enters decommissioning, we do not go away. We're going to be here until we terminate the license. The level of that activity will be based on the safety consequences or safety activities that go on at the site during the decommissioning process. So when there's major activity going on, the NRC will be there to inspect the plant. The second part of the PSDR is an estimate of the expected decommissioning costs. We look at that strictly from a radiological standpoint, how much reasonable assurance is there that the money is there that can cover the radiological decommissioning. The last part of this is that we require the licensee to provide us with a discussion that basically says we are still within the environmental impacts that we're going to conduct during decommissioning and that they are bounded by the current environmental impact statement. So they will do a review of the current environmental impact statements for the plant to verify that they are still consistent with those requirements. If not, they are to inform us. The NRC actions, obviously we register the PSDR in the Federal Register. We make it publicly available. We will hold a public meeting, which we're going to do on February 19th here in the vicinity of the facility to discuss the PSDR and solicit public comments. During that meeting, we will obviously host the meeting to obtain those comments. We will publish the notice again for that meeting in the Federal Register and local newspapers and local media. During the informational meeting, we will invite the licensee. I believe Entergy's already accepted to speak. We will ask state and local officials to identify themselves and give a brief comment if they would. And of course, we will, our purpose is to get general comments or comments from the general public on the PSDR. We will provide a written transcript of the PSDR after we complete it. The content of the PSDR are described in 5082 as I stated. We use Reg Guide 1.185 to ensure the content of the document meets our requirements. So that's also publicly available on our website for you to look at. The project manager, which is currently with the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation, coordinates the public PSDR technical reviews, and he will coordinate that review from not only the safety aspects, but with our financial people on the economics and the funding, but also with our environmental review people to conduct a review of our own of the environmental impacts of the decommissioning. And of course, if it doesn't meet what we think it needs, we will request additional information, and these will be developed and sent to the licensee. Oops, went too far. Part of the planned decommissioning activities and schedule, we would expect the licensee to provide to us any activities that are unique to the facility. We will conduct a NRC safety review. Based on that, we will determine what NRC oversight and inspection activities we need to do, whether it's keep the resident inspector on for a length of time beyond the shutdown. Sarah Rich is here. She's going to be here, I guess, for the next at site for probably the next 6 months or more, but the possibility she will extend her stay there at the site. But then Mark's folks will come up with a plan for the inspection throughout the decommissioning based on the activity schedule that the licensee provides us. My group, eventually the plant will be transferred to my organization in reactor decommissioning, where we will be the project managers and oversee all the NRC licensing activities up to and including the license termination. So we continue to be there throughout the whole process. The site decommissioning cost estimate is to provide a reasonable assurance that the funds are there to perform the radiological cleanup. And if there are delays, we expect the licensee to come up with the means for adjusting the cost estimate and the funding over the storage period. The last bullet I have there is that now that they are decommissioning, they are required to report to us each year on the status of the decommissioning fund. So each year now, we will receive a report. I think it's due into us end of each March, which we will review to ensure that the information they're providing will meet that reasonable assurance. Reasons for concluding that the environmental impact associated are bounded by the previously used one. There's a lot of information in New Reg 0586, which is the generic EIS for decommissioning, and we will continue to verify that they are within that envelope through the inspection program. So the PSDR review process, if there's no additional information that's required, we will notify the licensee that we have received and I guess I want to use the word accepted or their PSDER. We do not approve the PSDER. As I said before, it's an informational requirement in the regulation to provide us with the decommissioning strategy, cost estimate, and ensure that they're going to remain within the environmental impact statement. It is not a federal action, so we don't approve it. Like I said, all the decommissioning activities can be performed within the existing operating license. They maintain the plant, they replace components, all these things they can do on a routine basis. The licensee may begin major decommissioning 90 days after the NRC receives the PSDER, so some of the funding becomes available to them. As far as a license termination plan, after the licensee conducts most of the decommissioning in accordance with the license and technical specifications, and we continue our on-site inspections, the licensee is required to submit a license termination plan to us 2 years prior to requesting the termination. So that can be very far off in the future. We will notice the LTP in the Federal Register, and we will hold a public meeting to discuss the license termination plan. The license termination plan is a very technical document. It goes into the dose modeling and how the licensee is going to demonstrate compliance with the dose requirements for us to terminate the license. In a nutshell. Oops, again, I did it again. As far as the LTP goes, we will perform an acceptance review, and then we will perform a detailed technical review. It may take up to a year or more for us to do that. As we discover information in it, or the lack of, we will request additional information. We will hold a public meeting, and there's also an opportunity for hearing. The NRC approves the LTP by a license amendment. It is a federal action. Okay, so we will write a safety evaluation report and perform an environmental assessment to go with that document. The license is terminated upon demonstration by the licensee and NRC confirmatory surveys that the license meets the unrestricted release criteria. So not only will our inspectors be surveying the site as the decontamination and dismantlement continues, we will also do confirmatory surveys at the very end of the process to verify that it meets our criteria. And for the most part, we employ an independent contractor out of Oak Ridge Associated Universities to do a lot of that work. So we have an independent contractor do that also. This is kind of a synopsis of our decommissioning process. You can see what the licensee is required to do, our actions in it, and the opportunities for the public to participate in the process. I do want to point out that for every license amendment that is submitted to us, there is an opportunity for public comment. And so any licensing activities that go on throughout the process, besides these big ones, there is opportunity for public involvement. As I mentioned, our oversight continues. We have an inspection manual dedicated to decommissioning. It's 2561 if you want to go look it up on our website. It has about 40 inspection procedures. 12 of those are core, what we call core inspection procedures, which are required to be done each year. And there are about 28 discretionary inspection procedures that the inspectors can look at during the course of the year. There's one on, there used to be one on what we call cold weather preparations, but now we call it adverse preparations because now we have the plant in Florida that gets hurricanes. But that would include the layup for winter for freeze protection. The inspection a program is adjusted to the site activities. Like I said, Mark Furtis's group will be performing the inspections, out of Region 1. Currently in our decommissioning program with Vermont Yankee permanent shutdown, there are 19 power reactors in decommissioning. 5 of those are in very active decon. 14 of those are in safe store. At the present time, we still consider Vermont Yankee transitioning into the safe store situation, since they will be preparing the plant for safe store and eventual decommissioning because they're processing waste and processing water and emptying systems and de-energizing equipment they no longer need. So we still have that as a transition in our minds. There are 7 research reactors in decommissioning right now. 3 of those are very active, 4 in safe store, and we are expecting an eighth one in this year. Now, I'm open to any questions. I hope I fulfilled some of your questions that you may have had before the meeting.
Thank you, Bruce, very much. Thanks a lot. So let's start with the panel members, and you guys should feel free, wherever you want, Bruce or Drew, to have your folks weigh in. You're welcome to do that. But questions from the panel? David.
Mr. Watson, can you describe for us the threshold between a major and minor decommissioning activity?
A major activity would one that they would have to come to us for permission to do. In other words, it would be outside the license or outside the technical specifications for them to do that, perform that activity.
And just following up on that, then, does that become one of the license amendments? Does that require notice and process?
It may be.
Yeah. Okay.
Bruce, it's defined in one of our documents where it's the permanent removal of major radiological components or permanently modifying the containment structure or results in dismantling components for shipment containing greater than Class C waste. So that's how major is defined.
Mm-hmm. Pretty major.
Go ahead.
I understand, or you said that you do not at any point approve the PSDAR, but I'm just wondering what that means in terms of making sure that at least it's adequate. Is there a flip side to that where you could send it back and say this is not good enough? Can you reject it?
Like I said, we do ask for additional information if we felt it was inadequate. We always have the ability to send it back to the licensee and say it does not meet our requirements specified by the regulation and is described in, say, Reg Guide 1.185.
Right, so basically not sending it back means you're tacitly approving it.
We don't approve it. It's still information. Okay?
Yeah, I think for all of us on the panel, as well as I'm sure the general public, is general confusion about what that means. Is it, in other words, are you looking for it to be adequate, and therefore if you don't ask questions about it, does that mean it is adequate? Or, I mean, how do we read?
What we're looking for in our review of the PSDR are there any safety issues that we haven't previously identified? Are there any environmental impacts that haven't previously been identified, where we would want to go and do additional review or inspection or whatever it is to verify that the decommissioning can be done safely?
I have a question. Oh, I don't know. It's okay. So you mentioned earlier that we have a radiological decontamination standard at 25 milligrams, but that most plants or all plants that have done this so far have been well below that to a fraction of it. How does that happen? Is that just because? Well, I'll just stop there. How does that happen if they're shooting for 25?
Well,
why do we end up lower?
they develop what we call derived concentration guideline levels, which are actual measurements in the field based on the radionuclides that are there. So from that, they come up with a number which equals 25. Okay, so they can't exceed that 25 for any of that fraction of 25 for any of the nuclides. So the summation of those would be below 25. We also insist that they practice a layer as part of that 25. So obviously, when they actually can measure something that looks, I'll say, obviously there, then they are obligated to remove it. So that's how they really get down to only a few milliround. So, you know, when they come up with a DCGL, as we would call it, for 25, some write them for 20, and then still go below that. So that's basically how that works. And then we would look at that concentration for all types of pathway analysis into the, whether it's through drinking water, through crops, through resuspension of solids from the soils, et cetera, direct radiation if it was a structure. So that's how you come up with the 25.
Go ahead. Let me just add one thing on that. You know, when you're out there digging up contaminated dirt, I mean, you're not, you know, you can't be that precise. You know, you're digging up probably more dirt than you actually really needed to dig up to get down to the 25 milligram level. So as you dig up more dirt, you're lowering the concentrations. You're getting to cleaner soil. You lower the concentration even below the 25 milligram level.
The last thing people want to do as a matter of practicality is dig something up or decontaminate something and then have to go back and redo it.
Yeah.
So they generally clean it up as best they can the first time and then verify that it's going to meet the criteria. It's kind of a common sense thing and practicality for decommissioning.
Chris, do you want to ask a follow-up question? Just it relates just to the standard. Do you know, does the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have a standard for exposure that's different than the one that the NRC uses for the sites they clean up or that are under their jurisdiction?
We have a memorandum of understanding with the EPA. It's based on the concentration levels that we approve. We have what we call 2 action levels or 2 trigger levels. One of them is if we just approve an LTP or a decommissioning plan for another site, whether we exceed their numbers for meeting the dose criteria, so their concentration numbers. Occasionally we will approve that. However, for the most part, the second part of our notification of them is that the residual numbers are still below the EPA numbers. Then we just say, then we don't have to notify them at all. They're satisfied with that. Does that make sense? They have 2 tables of numbers, before cleanup and after. So we notify them before the cleanup what those numbers are, and if any of our numbers that we approve are above that, we have to notify them. They always have the option to come in back later if they want to, but there's another set of numbers, residual numbers that are left over that are, when the plant is completed, their decommissioning, where we would have to report to them if any of those numbers were exceeded as part of the dose calculation. Okay?
Chris, go ahead.
Chris, I have a question when there's no meeting. Yeah.
Okay, Pat, I think you're on.
Okay. Actually, I have 2 questions, if you could. Could you tell me how you plans on the prior slide were utility-owned versus merchant-owned? And my second question is, do we assume that the license termination occurs before, during, or after? Will their license terminate while there's still dry cask storage on site?
Okay, good questions. The first question is the only other merchant plant we have currently in decommission is Kewanee, which shut down, I think, May of last year, 2013. And they have elected to go into safe store. So we don't have too much experience with the merchant plant other than Kewanee, and they're complying with the requirements. When we say we terminate the reactor license, what we really mean is we are terminating the footprint on which the reactor existed in its support facilities. In most cases, the ISFC will either have a specific license or that Part 50 license, general license, will be shrunk down to only that part. But the actual 50 operating license that was originally issued for the plant is now terminated.
So Bruce, the license termination doesn't apply to the ISFC pad?
Because they have to license that separately.
It's a separate license.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or continue under a general 50, which they can convert to.
Okay.
Okay?
Thanks.
So, if I could
Hang on a
ask a
second.
follow-up, sorry.
Yeah, Pat, hang on a second. Mark is going to give us a little more on that.
Yeah, as Bruce said, there's two licensing mechanisms for dry cask storage. One's the specific and one's the general. General is predominant, what's used in the industry now. you need a Part 50 license in order to institute the general license requirement. So the Part 50 license still stays in effect even with just the IFSC on site, because that allows you to use the general license provisions, which says you elect to use a cast that's been pre-approved by the NRC, and it's in the Part 72 regulation. So a Part 50 license has to stay, just like an operating plan. There's tech specs associated with them. Different, but there's still a, I'll say a line of licensing, to the maintenance or the operation of an IFSC to the NRC. So there's always a line of licensing still in a place.
And, okay, Pat, follow up.
So I think the burning question many of us have had is, when could we expect any possible reuse of that site? And is it possible to reuse that site while there's still dry cask storage in place? Is that something you can answer?
Well, I can only tell you what the other sites have done. And at Rancho Seco, which is in California, they built 2 combined cycle combustion units on their property to take advantage of the grid there. Humboldt Bay installed 8 natural gas peaking units on the same site. Big Rock Point up in Michigan is basically a park, because the Big Rock there is the big importance to the Native Americans up there. So they returned it to park type space so people can go to see the Big Rock. Maine Yankee, I believe they donated most of the land to a nonprofit, I think it was called the Chewonki organization. So it's basically a nature park. And so, yeah, they can be reused for whatever purpose the licensee or the stakeholders, I guess, engage with them on what they can reuse the property for. La Crosse, which is in Iowa, adjacent to the old reactor, they have a very large coal plant because they need the generating capacity. So these sites can be used, as we say, unrestricted for whatever purpose the owner, as I say, owner of the property chooses to do.
Even with the dry on site, is that correct?
Yeah, the ISSC itself is its own entity. It has its own security force, its own fences and everything else to keep an exclusion area. So it may be a very small part of the entire reactor site, but this reactor site can be used for other purposes afterwards.
Hey, Chris, finally.
So I just have a question about the generic environmental impact statement. I believe in the PSDAR, entities relying on the generic EIS. Is that what you
I think that's correct.
So in the generic EIS, one of the requirements is that you assess the socioeconomic impacts. And in the generic EIS, staff makes the generic conclusion that the impacts on the socioeconomics are going to be small and that they consider mitigation and conclude that no additional measures are likely to be sufficiently beneficial to be warranted. But also in the generic EIS, it states that large plants located in rural areas that permanently shut down early and choose the safe store option are the likeliest to have negative impacts, which would seem to describe this situation, Kewaunee and others. And it goes on to say that considering all variables such as plant size and community size is the same, plants that go into immediate decon have fewer negative socioeconomic impacts that are less immediate than those of safe store. And so I guess I'm wondering from an NRC perspective, what level of socioeconomic impact do you expect to see when a plant in a rural area permanently ceases operation and chooses a safe store option over decon? And is a socioeconomic impact assessment, including a mitigation plan, warranted?
We haven't looked at that. Obviously, it's a consideration. I don't know that we have anything specific on that. I'll take that question back to our environmental people who are going to be doing the review. But the shutdown of the plant, and hopefully not prematurely, but as happened in this case, is a planned event, so the impact can be better managed. But unfortunately, that's the reality of the economics of the situation here. So, but I will take that back to our reviewers to see if I can get some kind of read on that. Okay?
David?
I want to follow a little bit more on trying to understand the PSDAR and the NEPA process and the kind of environmental review of the Entergy's proposed decommissioning plan, to make sure I understand it. So since you don't approve the PSDAR and you rely on a NEPA, an environmental impact statement, but that environmental impacts, there's no specific review of the specific plan that Entergy is proposing to do, right? There's nothing that's been done to date that's a specific environmental analysis or evaluating the risks to public health and the environment of their specific plan that's been described in the PSDAR or related documents. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, each plant has its own environmental review or impact statement done for it.
This plant, the plan for how they're going to decommission this plant.
Right.
There's a specific plan and description of that they've been developing and are captured
Right.
in this process. That plan is not, there's no environmental review by the NRC of that plan.
What we do is we look at the current environmental impact and looking at the generic impact statement, whether or not they're still within the requirements of those documents, okay? Building and deconstructing a plant are kind of similar in many ways. If the plant environmentally could be operated safely, it could be decommissioned safely, still within the same environmental envelope. The same controls are in place for controlling material, exposing people, et cetera, et cetera. So,
And
the
so
releases,
then-
and the radiological environmental monitoring program continues once the plant shut down. So they continue to monitor the plant to ensure that the environmental safety envelope is maintained.
The one document where there is, so there is no specific review. You're relying on, as you said, this generic set of assessments and standards.
And the environmental impact statement already done for the plant, the environmental assessments.
Before they submitted the current decommissioning plan that they're about to embark upon.
Right.
And the one point, as I understand it in this process, and the diagram you described up there, where the NRC will engage in a specific analysis of whether or not this plan is sufficient, is the long-term, the LTP, I think is what you described it as?
Well, no, we look at it as part of the PSDAR review too. Okay, we
But
have
the
some.
PSDAR, you're very clear, you don't approve the PSDAR. You don't approve anything until you approve the license termination, the LTP, whatever.
Well, actually, we approve a lot of things. We approved the security plan, we approved the environmental monitoring program, we approved virtually everything. We approved the tech specs that they're going to submit to change. We're going to, any licensing activities that associated with that are changes in the decommissioning, we will approve those. Like I said, this actual PSDAR is our activities that they're going to provide to us that are already within, they can do right now, today, within the existing license safety envelope with the license and the other tech specs that they have, environmental reports. And
I would just be, I don't recall seeing any of those other things that you listed up on your diagram.
Well-
So I'll try to dig deeper and make sure I understand what it is that you actually approved. But what the way you described it looked to me like the only point at which there's a specific determination of whether or not they have, followed the plan and whether that plan is, resulting in environmental cleanup is at the LTP stage, which is, could be 50 years from now.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, yeah, as part of the PSDAR review, we do have to make sure that the environmental impacts are bounded. I mean, if they're not, then the PSDAR is inadequate.
Bounded by an environmental impact statement
Correct.
that was done before this plan was even developed. Or
It's a
before,
generic
frankly,
environmental
it was even
impact.
contemplated
Yeah.
on what timeline they would be closing the plant.
Right, it's a generic environmental impact statement, but the impacts in that GEIS, the generic environmental impact statement, need to bound it needs to be bounding for the site at the current time. In other words, we'll look to ensure that the GEIS, and there's another site-specific one, we'll look that the environmental impacts of the decommissioning are bounded by the existing environmental impact statements, mainly the generic environmental impact statement.
Yep.
So that review is done at the PSDAR stage. If it's not, we can reject the PSD. I mean, if it's inadequate, we can just send the PSDAR back as being inadequate. But, we don't approve it, but on the other hand, we can reject it and say it doesn't meet our regulations.
But all the decommissioning activities associated with, from an environmental impact statement, environmental impact, noise, shipping radioactive material, transportation, those are all pretty standard things that they do right now. And they also did these things when they constructed the plant. So the environmental envelope, if you want to call it that, has pretty much been pretty broadly reviewed, completed already. And so we just verify you're going to stay within that impact statement that's already been approved.
Does that answer your question? Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Yes. That answers it not in the way that I would, frankly, it doesn't answer it in the way that I would hope. I would hope that, that there would be a specific review of a cleanup plan for the plant, not a reliance on a generic EIS and relying on kind of some fairly uncertain legal concepts like bounding. I would like to think, when we do a cleanup in my department, we were overseeing a cleanup of an oil tank spill. We require submission of a plan and make sure that we reviewed it in advance to make sure that the public health and the environment is going to be protected. It remains a little unclear to me, and I'll do some more research and work to make sure I fully understand all those other steps that Bruce described, because there may be that you are effectively doing what we would do. I just don't understand it from the description so far.
From an operational standpoint, going into decommissioning, when they do maintenance and do modifications to the plant, when they're operating, they do a safety review, they develop a work plan on how to do the work safely. They also have procedures on how to do certain things. Those things continue during decommissioning. That's what our inspectors inspect to make sure they have a plan for doing specific tasks to make sure they're done safely and that they carry them out and document everything properly. So that's why we're saying it doesn't change from an operational standpoint in the decommissioning. They're still doing, I'll call it decommissioning. It's really somewhat of a maintenance activity to remove a pump or disassemble something. They're just not going to put it back together again. But we have procedures on how to maintain pumps and replace pipes and other things that they would follow and do their engineering with and their work package development and procedures on how to do it. This is the process that the licensee would follow during this decommissioning process that we would review as part of the inspection process. Okay.
Chris, follow up, and then I'll go over to this side.
I think this is really quick. I thought I saw on the slide that the act of accepting or not rejecting the PSDAR, that what that allows them to do is then then release funds from the decommissioning trust to begin the act of decommissioning.
Yeah, as far as the regulations are fairly specific, they're allowed to take out, and don't quote me because I don't know personally, it's not my area of expertise, but they're allowed to take out 3% in the beginning to do some planning. They're allowed to take up to 20% after, I think, the PSDER submitted to start doing some work. So
after the 90 days.
Yeah, after 90 days, they can do that or something.
After 90 days, they can take an additional 20%. Before that, they can take 3% for decommissioning planning.
It's so they can get started on the process.
So from a practical standpoint, having a non-accepted PSDAR, if you're going into safe store, which is not decommissioning.
Well, it is decommissioning.
Okay.
They're in decommissioning status.
All right. Okay.
All right. So real quick, Jim.
My question sort of links with the commissioners. One of your slides talked about the fact that inspections are not going to go away, that those are going to continue, and there's an inspection program. Are those inspections based on a periodic schedule, or are they based on stages of the activity at the plant?
Both.
Both. Could you give us some idea?
For example, a plant that has been in safe store for many years will get an annual inspection. Okay. Plants that are doing major activities like moving fuel to an ISFC will get many inspections. Okay, because that's fairly high risk major activity. Plants who are doing major dismantling work will receive lots of inspections. Okay, so it's based on both the level of activity and at least annually we're going to be there to verify that they're complying with the license that's been issued to them for the safe store conditions. Okay. So we try to use our resources prudently too.
Right.
Okay.
So
So Molly actually had a question.
Okay.
I did, I don't know if you can hear this, but I'm just trying to, Bruce, thank you. I'm just trying to make sense of kind of the conversation here, maybe putting it into my own simple way of trying to understand the PSDAR, correct? Do I have that right? And what that means in the relationship to the NRC and the relationship to Entergy and to all of us here. So the ultimate, at the very end over here, is that the NRC has the ultimate responsibility of regulating this process.
Correct.
And as long as Entergy has a license, NRC is responsible at the bottom line, correct?
Correct.
So the NRC makes the final determination as to the license. And it is the PSDAR, the process for Entergy to get to that termination. So I'm trying to understand the difference. We get hung up on here on approval, but what I'm thinking is you either accept it or not. Entergy or any owner in this sense would have to meet the criteria that the NRC determines to terminate the license.
Right.
And this is the process. They are providing a plan to the NRC to say, this is the process for us to get to the termination. And that plan could go back and forth if it doesn't meet the bottom line for the NRC to terminate the license.
The bottom line requirement is they have to complete the radiological decommissioning in 60 years.
Right.
They have a variety of roadmaps to get there, okay? San Onofre has chosen to go what they call decon, and they're going to take 20 years to do it, okay? We have a plant, Fermi 1, which is basically almost completely decommissioned, but they're kind of in a special case with funding, and so they will go back, and when the funds build up, they go and do major work, and then they stop for a while. So they kind of float back and forth. So our inspection activities float back and forth, but what they're doing is safe. It's still within the 60-year requirement, and so it's their option what they want, how they want to conduct the decommissioning. Okay. Like I said, our number one role is an independent safety regulator. So keep that in mind. That's what we're all about.
Yeah, thanks for coming and for making the presentation and for all the NRC folks that arrived here. I wanted to ask about the 7 power reactors that have been decommissioned. How many of those are a safe store condition and have no other operating nuclear reactor on the same site? For example, Millstone has a safe store plant and it has operating reactors on that site.
Let's make sure we're talking the same numbers. Millstone is one of the 19 that's in decommissioning status. It is in safe store. It's one of the 14 that's in safe store. It's at a multi-unit site. Most of the multi-unit sites, plants in safe store are at multi-unit sites. Part of our rationale is we want the operator to focus on the operating facilities, not worry about safely decommissioning all these dismantling activities while the other plants are operating, okay? All of the other plants, pretty much, Rancho, Sanco, Maine Yankee, Connecticut Yankee, Big Rock Point, I'm not gonna name them all, but they're all pretty much single unit facilities. You could probably argue that Humboldt Bay is a multi-unit facility, but it's only one nuclear plant. There were 2 fossil plants next to it. But I'm just saying that all of these, the ones that have absolutely been decommissioned and the license is terminated, meaning the actual reactor footprint is shrunk, are all been released for unrestricted use. So the licensee can do what they want to with them. Now, like I said, there's 19 in the program right now, 5 are inactive, and 14 are basically in safe store. Okay.
So the question I'm trying to get to is, with a multi-unit site, you have criteria for the operating plants that describe how you have a radiological environmental monitoring program. What criteria will you use for these single unit sites?
It doesn't change. It's the same. They continue to monitor the water, the groundwater, the surface waters, whatever's in that requirement.
So there wouldn't be any reductions?
No, they still required us to report it annually. Like I said, when they're in safe store, they still have a lot of work to do to make sure that the plant remains safely, and we'll inspect those things.
So for example, if they're doing 100 samples while they're operating and then they stop operating, you're still going to have similar kind of sampling program.
Correct.
And what kind of review process? Is that a license amendment review when they make a change to the radiological
They would have,
environmental
yeah, they would have to request a change for the radiological environmental monitoring plan. So we would review that. I would imagine we would put that out for public comment and make sure there's no reduction in safety from it.
Yeah, for the, you know, just to add on that, for the most part, typically I haven't read the proposal that BY has for their permanent shutdown tech specs, but I think they're following the industry, what has been done. Those are, the ramp and rent programs stay in effect. They're actually in most of the shutdown plants are referenced in their tech specs, so it's a tech spec requirement that they maintain the program and do their and submit their annual reports. So it's almost in that area, it's going to be like nothing's changed.
So if it's in the tech specs, it would come to us as an amendment.
You know, those are the off-site and the on-site environmental monitoring programs that they have.
Radiological Environmental Monitoring Program, we REMP, and so that's the acronym, and we said REMP.
Thank you.
I'm going to interrupt after this.
Okay, thanks. This won't be long, I don't think. The, one of your slides, you talked about restricted versus unrestricted use at termination, and that all of the commercial sites thus far have been unrestricted. Where in the process and how is that decision arrived at?
Basically, the licensee is going to have to justify to us why they would want to go for restricted release. Okay, and I think the bar is pretty high. And so I think that generally they would have to have some extraordinary circumstances in order to want to request a restricted release.
Is that defined anywhere where?
It has a whole bunch of different requirements in it, engaging the public, a whole lot of additional requirements. It obviously affects the state and the stakeholders and the local citizens a lot more if it's going to be basically a restricted release.
Well, in the back of my mind in asking that question is an assumption that there are probably a lot of decisions between here and there that end up framing that situation. I mean, it gets you to that point where you're saying that, well, what you're saying sort of answers that question. That it's a high bar.
The biggest issue I can say is, do you have adequate funds to perform the radiological decommissioning? And the regulations require that we verify that they have reasonable assurance that they have the money to radiologically clean up the facility. So therefore, there would be no need to go to a restricted release. They should have the funds to clean it all up.
But the licensee would decide, propose if they want one or the other. And as Bruce said, it's a high bar to go to unrestricted. That's why nobody has gone that route yet. It's not an easy path to go down. You end up having restrictions in the deeds and restrictions in this, and you have much more public involvement in a restricted release than you do in an unrestricted release. And nobody has chosen to go down that path.
Well, I guess from a business perspective, and knowing that the EPA and brownfields, for example, a lot of sites are restricted when they're released, and so it would be useful to understand what that bar is. It's reassuring to know that it's high. It would be more reassuring yet to know what it is.
So Jim, just to also add, and for the benefit of our NRC guests, you know, the settlement agreement between us and Entergy also has that they will restore the site. We didn't use the unrestricted use term because we didn't want to just glom on to the NRC's criteria, but in plain language, that the site would be usable for any purpose. Right. So, you know, and we'll be working with them on the site restoration standards that are above and beyond the radiological. So I think, and Entergy has represented that they intend to go the unrestricted use, you know, method path. So I think, but you're probably right. 10 years from now, we should have this discussion again and see how we're doing.
Well, we should, and I think that from the NRC's perspective, rightfully, radiological health and safety, if that's affordable, and the other things that the state has agreed to with Entergy are above and beyond that, I think it's right to assume that the NRC will say, well, that's beyond what we regulate. And so you could end up restricted.
No, not us.
Well,
we're not party, let me make sure you're clear on one thing. We're not party to the settled. Okay? The state can require additional requirements beyond our federal requirements. Okay? As long as they meet our federal requirements, we can terminate a license. Right now, they have committed, I believe in the PSDR, that they're going to go for unrestricted release. And if there was going to be a major change, they would be notifying us of that, and we would have a lot of discussion.
Right. Okay. They would have to notify you of a change from that.
Right. Correct. And of course, you would expect that they would have already consulted with the state and others. So.
All right. We have gone over by about 15 minutes, but I think this has been very useful. But I want to, if the panel is okay, what I would like to do is open it up for the 10 minutes that we were, 20 minutes that we were planning on doing with the audience, see if there are any questions out there, and then, just circle back to the panel just to see if there's any closing things. But let me just ask, again, you recognize that this is more about process than it is about, NRC is not prepared to, and we're not asking them to respond to the PSDAR that was submitted in substance. So if you don't mind taking that as a guideline, we'll start. And if you could just state your name real clearly and speak loudly. I don't know why I'm using this mic, but it's fun to hold.
Go New Hampshire. My name's Mike Mulligan, and I live in Hinsdale, New Hampshire. And generally, I think the rules are that if you're a regulated plant, you get decommissioned within 10 years. If you are a merchant plant, it's off past 100 years, and that type of stuff with as far as decommissioning. The way it's going now is that a lot of the merchant plants are going to get swept aside because of the economic problems and stuff. And so there's going to be a population of a lot more plants being decommissioned and shutting down and stuff. And so all these regulations and all this stuff is going to get swept away once the larger population gets involved with decommissioning. And whatever the NRC says, it goes by what the public wants and not by what the rules are. You can do these rules. So I would wish everybody would keep an eye on the future and realize that the future isn't that structured. Once a lot of plants start decommissioning, things will change. As far as the NRC is concerned, definitions are tricky. What does safety mean? Safety usually means not having severe core melt or the offline the fence line rads going over 5 rem per hour, whatever it is. So what's the NRC? That's the typical definition of safety. What is the definition of safety? Thank you.
I would have to say that safety in this case for decommissioning is pretty much as low as reasonably achievable. And that means you're going to stay within the environmental requirements of the regulations. You're going to maintain the worker doses within the requirements. You're going to comply with the Department of Transportation requirements for shipping radioactive waste. You're going to maintain the greater envelope of doing things safely, whether it's picking up a heavy load, doing all the things you would do in an industrial safety to make sure that the plant is decommissioned safely. So I think in this case, those types of safety definitions are already in there. For an operating facility, obviously they want to do all those things safely too. So from decommissioning, it really doesn't change other than we don't have a core to melt anymore. and from that perspective, the safety risk is significantly reduced for a plant that's in decommissioning.
If you can't melt the core, then that means you could tolerate a lot more risk.
No, I would say the risk is reduced. Not that we allow more risk. The risk is reduced by the mere fact that we don't have a core that can melt anymore and cause that type of consequences.
Okay, thanks.
Chris Williams from Hancock, Vermont. Earlier, you referenced a special circumstance at Fermi 1. And I'm wondering, is the special circumstance at Fermi 1 because of the severe accident that occurred there in the 60s?
No, the actual circumstance with Fermi 1 has to do with its funding. That plant was an old atomic, I believe it was a old atomic energy kind of experimental plant, and that's why they had the fuel melt and shut it down right away.
Right.
The accident is well documented, but it's not, I wouldn't call it the most severe one we've ever had. Obviously 3 Mile Island is that. But the issue with them is that the Detroit Edison,
Yeah.
Detroit Edison? DTE they call themselves now. They change every year. But my point is that they are in the special circumstances for funding because they agreed to decommission a plant when they actually bought the property there and they built Unit 2, I think it is. I don't know all the specifics, but that's part of it. So they're funding the decommissioning out of the stockholders' profits, not as opposed to having, there was no established big decommissioning fund because there was no regulations on that at the time. So now, as far as special circumstances though, there are special ones, and one of them I wanted to mention is San Onofre is on government land. It's on land owned by the Navy, and they leased it from the Navy to build the plant. So they have another third-party agreement with the Navy on that decommissioning that we're not involved in, okay?
And San Onofre is a utility-owned plant, which means in terms of decommissioning funding, they can, through the regulators, go back to the ratepayers.
And they have more than adequate funding from what we've seen to decommission the plants. But one of the things I want to mention also from the previous question is that of the 14 plants that are in safe store right now, only 2 of those are merchant plants.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rod Francis. I'm the planning director of the town of Brattleboro. I have a couple of household kind of questions, and then a couple of follow-up questions. So, first of all, is this PowerPoint going to be available via either the Public Service Department's website or your website?
What was available?
The PowerPoint you just presented.
We will make it available on
I would assume it would be part of the meeting.
Good. And then the webinar that you just indicated was going to be February the 3rd or the 5th. Is that going to be recorded so that it could be accessed subsequent to the actual conduct of the webinar?
I don't think we're recording that one, but no, I don't think we are.
All right. Now,
but for that, there'll be a meeting, there'll be a summary, and the slides will be available.
Oh, great. Okay, good, thank you. And I'd just like to follow up the point made by Chris Campany. So in our letter to the Public Service Board, or the Public Service Department on the Entergy's PSDAR, we identified the apparent contradiction between the generic environmental impact assessment study on the question of socioeconomic impact, and that the only observation that was made, for plants pursuing a safe store strategy in rural areas was that was of noticeable impact. Given that we're drawing attention to that tonight, and you want to go back and discuss that with other people, my question to you is: you're currently reviewing the PSDAR for adequacy. How does this aspect of the generic environmental impact assessment study bear down on your ability to conclude that it's either adequate, that the PSDAR as presented to you is either adequate or inadequate?
Well, we'll have our environmental reviewers do that, and
you can't speak to the rulemaking process or the criteria that you would.
I really can't, given the time. It's not really my area of expertise, to tell you the truth. But that's the purpose we have in the process for the PSDAR, is to solicit comments from the public, and so we will be taking that one back.
Okay.
Before.
So then my follow-up question is: what is it that you actually do with the public comment? How's it processed, and how does it affect your review process?
Like I said, we look at the comments for the safety significance in them, and also to verify that we think that we are still within the environmental bounding of the current
PISs and others. So your question is right in line with the things that we would be looking for. Okay? And we will publish a meeting summary from that, and we typically will kind of combine similar comments and respond to them. Thank you.
Yes.
Nancy Rouse, I live in Putney, and I just have a question about Entergy and its financial future, which is, SafeStore is a long process. We're talking 60 years, and I know this hasn't happened yet, but has the NRC taken into account what happens if a merchant plants company is not solvent at that time, and if the decommission fund is not up to the money of decommissioning the nuke in 60 years? I mean, who knows whether Entergy is going to be with us in 60 years?
Yeah. Ultimately, the decommissioning has to be completed in 60 years, as we've stated. Ultimately, the funding for that is a parent guarantee. And so the entity known as Entergy is legally responsible to ensure that the decommissioning is completed within 60 years, the radiological decommissioning. So having the 60 years or 40 or 50 years to grow the fund, if that's not adequate, then they'll probably have to supplement that, I would imagine.
If they don't, what if they are non-existent, like Enron or something?
Well, when they accepted the license for the plant, they also accepted a clause in the regulations which says that they're responsible for the safety of that facility and throughout its license until the license is terminated. So the CEO and company will be responsible for ensuring that the license is, the decommissioning is completed through license termination. I don't know how much more plainer to put it, is that they are legally responsible for the safe conduct of the plant and its conditions throughout its life.
So there is no alternative?
No, they're, like I say, they are legally responsible for the safety of that plant through its entire life. Okay. It's called the Common Defense Clause in the regulations.
All right, so just to maybe clarify a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so
No, me neither, so this is great. You and I can clarify, and we'll drive the lawyers crazy that are in the room. So I assume that if there are successors or assigns, that they take on this obligation.
Right. The license will never be transferred unless it's transferred to an entity that has the solvency and ability to complete the safety, either safe operation or safe decommissioning of the licensed air license.
Okay, so I think that's also helpful, but to the point though, I mean, and in my simplistic mind, like, if I have obligations and I die, I don't really care anymore what you want to do to try and make those obligations occur. You know, I'm just not in the picture anymore. So I think that's more the nature of the question. And of course there are various corporate levels here for Entergy. That very carefully, what we're really talking about is Entergy Vermont Yankee, right? How do you decide that entity is sufficiently structured to handle this, or
they would
reach to others?
They would submit they want to transfer the license. They would have to submit the financial information to our financial people to verify that they're continued. There will be, I guess I'll call it, have the financial capability to complete all the activities safely with the license by becoming that entity. Okay.
All right. Well, there'll be more on this.
I just want to say, I think this topic is a really good topic to pose to our financial assurance, our financial
we'll have
specialists.
a financial assurance specialist.
We're not financial specialists in this process, but we do have one, and that person will be at the PSDAR meeting on February 6th, February 19th.
Yeah, that there's a preview for you. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Pat Moulton had asked you how long before the site could be used? You gave some examples of other sites and what they have done. Roughly, how long does that take before it can be used?
And sir, I'm sorry, do you mind stating your name?
My name is Dominic, and I'm with the Brattleboro Reformer.
Thank you, Dominic.
Well, the site can be reused once we terminate the license.
Okay.
So whatever plans they have for using that. Like I said, some of the other plants like Humboldt Bay, which is right now going under active decommissioning, basically took part of their site. We did surveys of the construction site to verify it was going to meet the license termination conditions. So when they built the new plan on it, so we don't have to go back and resurvey that. So it's in use now.
Okay.
But it's an industrial site, obviously.
Portions can be, it's possible also, I don't know if your chief plans to do this, but portions could be released from the license. It doesn't have to all be released at the same time. Different portions could be released separately if they meet the criteria.
The regulation on it is 5083, and we've used it, I think, once for San Onofre 1. San Onofre 1, where we released the discharge conduit, intake conduit that goes out to the Pacific Ocean from the license because it didn't met the radiological criteria and the state agreed.
Chris, just to follow up, when we worked on our resiliency plan for Vernon, I talked to one of your counterparts, Ron, bear with me 1 second, Ronald Bellamy. At the time he was Chief Reactor Projects Branch number 5, Region 1. And I asked him, I said, so what's the prospect of reusing the VY site? It's about 125 acres, right? And he said as long as the spent fuel is stored on the site, it's highly improbable that it'd be able to be reused for anything. Because it's a relatively small site, because it's relatively accessible.
Well, I really can't judge that. I mean, I've seen very small sites where the site gets reused. Humboldt Bay, I like to see that because it's like a postage stamp size of a plant. Now, it is being reused for utility business, but it's still being reused. And then the ones that have been turned into parks are still parks.
And then, and related to that, Maine Yankee, on the brochure they have, as long as spent nuclear fuel is stored at the Bailey Point Isthmus, this valuable piece of property is unavailable for productive reuse. And Connecticut Yankee has statements to that effect too. So there's maybe what regulation-wise could happen, but then there's the practical standpoint. I know that's you guys. I know you guys just you go by what your rules say.
Regulate commerce, is what you say, but the sites can be reused. But you got to have someone that wants to reuse it. And in a lot of cases, like I said, they've either been parks for public use, or they've been the utility or the not the licensee anymore, but the utility then that builds a new plant on it to take advantage of the water that's already there and the grid system and the local people generally like having something there. So in the immediate community. So like I said, it's up to them what they really want to do with the property. It's probably not going to have an amusement park built on it.
Okay, any other questions out there running on the PSDR process? Yes.
Thank you. Tim Murphy, Southwest Region Planning Commission in New Hampshire. There have been a couple of questions directed to the socioeconomic impacts and how it might influence the PSDAR review process. And I think what I'm hearing is that you're going to direct those questions to NRC's environmental review staff. So should we take from that the environmental review staff at NRC does take into account socioeconomic impacts as part of the PSDAR?
They would take part of all the requirements of NEPA.
Great, thank you.
All right, panelists, any other questions for now? We will no doubt get more opportunities, but I thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate this introduction to this. Look forward to seeing you again in a month.
Couple weeks,
great, that's great. And but thank you very much, and you're welcome to stay and make yourselves at home, or you're also welcome to get on the road back to wherever it is you need to go to, whichever you prefer. But I know the next thing on the agenda will be very exciting for you. Probably stuff you already know, but I hope it's stuff you already know. But we're going to turn this over to Entergy for some discussion of what the current status is. So, thank you, guys.
Chris, what's your preference? Want to speak from here or up there?
That microphone seemed to actually work for a little bit in terms of, and I think in terms of helping the audience here and us here, that might be better. Particularly, Chris, you're using a PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that'll work better. We'll see what's going on. Thanks, Joe.
Are you controlling this, Joe, or what?
You are.
Oh, now I need a lesson. Four scores, right? You got it.
Before I start, I want to thank Kate O'Connor. She's my hero for tonight for closing that door and stopping the flow of the 20-degree air in the room, so thank you very much. As the most bold person in the room, thank you. I just want to give a quick overview. Probably can make up a little bit of time here. I just want to give a quick update on where the plant is right now, a little bit on the people aspect of our business, a high-level overview of near-term actions, and most of those are 2015 actions, and a little bit longer term, and then just touch on the emergency plan because I know it's something that is already on the agenda for tonight. First of all, you know, there's been a lot of mention of the word safety here so far tonight, which is really, I'm happy to hear that, and I just want to reiterate that, you know, we do remain focused on safety at the power plant. It is a big part of our business, and as we go forward, we recognize that the conditions at the plant are different, so we are reinforcing to our folks the need to keep a keen focus on industrial, radiological, and nuclear safety, so we recognize our obligations for that, and that is first and foremost in our approach to business. So on the 29th of December, we did shut down the facility. At that time, we were operating around 75% power, and we completed a safe shutdown. Subsequent to that, our mechanics and electricians disassembled our reactor vessel, and over a period of about 10 days or so, operators safely moved the fuel out of the nuclear reactor and located it all into the spent fuel pool. When we did shut the plant down at the end of the operating cycle, we had operated for 633 days of continuous operation, which in fact was a record for Mont Yankee, and it was the second continuous operating cycle in the power plant in the last couple cycles there. Once we did defuel the reactor, we certified to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that we were defueled, and we formally notified them of our intent to permanently cease operations, and there certainly was a lot of foreshadowing of that in different submittals during the course of 2014. On the 20th, we did formally exit the reactor oversight process and transitioning to the decommissioning inspection program that the NRC just really went through in pretty good detail here. Related to people, and I know there's a lot of questions on the socio-economic impact of the shutdown of VY, related to our folks. Last Monday, we did have a workforce reduction. Our head count went down from 528 folks to 343 folks on site right now. That number we expect to lower somewhat more down to about 312 over the next several weeks as we transition some additional folks out of the organization. And that essentially head count of 312 we expect to be stable at through April of 2016. And that workforce will of course start the work in front of us, and they will also continue to serve as our emergency response organization in the near term. We have a piece of business in front of the NRC that we're waiting for approval from, and as a result of that, we're currently keeping about a dozen, it says 13 folks there on board to continue to staff our emergency response organization until we get approval from NRC. And in the course of our out-processing last week, we did transfer 67 folks from our plant to other Entergy facilities, really throughout the Northeast and the Southeast. And for the local region,
Overall, we've had 88 employees left Vermont Yankee that were living in Vermont, 69 in New Hampshire, and 28 from Massachusetts. And for all those folks, we have provided pretty generous retention, severance, and relocation benefits to make sure the folks, whether they transferred, whether they retired, or whether they left the company, that they're left with a good safety net to carry them forward. Just some of the things that are in front of us in the next year and a little bit further out. First and foremost, we'll continue to work with the state on the settlement agreement and work in good faith on the MOU that is in place. Related to decommissioning, some of the things that will be going on in the power plant in the near term would be what we call system draining and layup. Essentially, a lot of the power production systems are no longer necessary, no longer functional. They do have some level of hazards associated with them, such as lubricating oils, hydraulic oils, some water, batteries, and our mechanics and operators will be working through the process of removing those hazards and putting the plant in the safest possible condition for storage. And in many cases, we'll be moving those hazards off-site to disposition those as required. We'll also be working on removing power to some buildings in order to put them what we call in this cold and dark mode. So in previous meetings, I mentioned that from an energy efficiency standpoint, we have large facilities. Many of those large facilities are now largely vacant, and the equipment that used to operate in them used to also keep them warm. So we have to take steps to really conserve on the fuel oil that we do use and put those buildings in a safe condition. The NRC made mention of cold weather preparation or cold weather type inspections that they do. And we certainly recognize our responsibility to ensure that something as basic as fire system piping and things like that do not freeze. Those pipes do not freeze. So we have work ahead of us to make sure that for the interim period here, everything is kept in good order. We will be doing some system modifications and security modifications that really support some staffing changes that we foresee in our security department. And then in the next couple months, we'll be doing select structure and building removals. And these are mostly small outbuildings, storage sheds and things like that really serve no purpose for us anymore. And we'll be in the process of taking down those really through February and March for the most part to remove those buildings following all appropriate state and federal laws. As been mentioned, there was dialogue just previously on the ongoing environmental monitoring program. We will continue to implement that program as our current procedures and requirements require us to do. And we'll continue working with the state on the site restoration standards. And when I say continue, I guess we really need to get started on that piece of it.
Probably should.
Huh? Yeah.
Probably should.
Yeah. The other thing, and this is certainly a longer term thing, is the second ISPC or dry fuel storage pad. We're doing the engineering work for that. There's a lot of work ahead of us on that, including getting a certificate of public good from the state, and in the next several years work on the engineering and construction of that in order to support our goal of getting all fuel moved from the dry spent fuel pool and onto the dry fuel storage pad in 2020. Just want to touch briefly on the emergency plan. I know there's been a lot of dialogue, and I know it's one of the things that the panel wants to talk about tonight. Just as a reminder, we do continue to have a robust emergency plan in place. The states are currently fully funded, and you can see the numbers up there, really what the states are currently getting for funding in order to implement the emergency plan. We do expect to have minor changes in that plan as a result of the plant shutdown, and it's really a reference back to what I had in an earlier slide, waiting for approval from the NRC for a license amendment request. And that request will allow us to make relatively small changes in our staffing numbers, and it's really a reallocation of duties and responsibilities within the folks that fulfill our procedural requirements, and that should be really inconsequential overall to the site and to everybody off-site. We do, think that, and it was mentioned also
with the shutdown and the removal of the fuel from the nuclear reactor. It's a very significant reduction in potential events as a result of defueling. Essentially, the reactor vessel, is void of fuel. The internals of the reactor are still there, but all the energy is removed from it. So there are a large number of events that simply no longer can occur. With that being the case, and the fuel safely stored in the spent fuel pool and cooled in the spent fuel pool, we expect that in the future other emergency plan changes would be warranted, in large part because the slower progression of anything that were to occur would allow significant changes in response times and notification times, and would give tremendously more time to operators to react to anything that might occur. This is just an overview of the next several years. When we showed this at our earlier meeting, the plant was online, staffed at about 550 folks. We are now in that wet fuel, hot management bin with this was called out with 316 people. That was our target. Looks like we're going to come in around 312. I mentioned that. But we expect to be in this mode from now until April of 2016. And after that time, we expect that the energy of the fuel in the pool will reduce such that we can request and receive approval to make further changes in our emergency plan structure, and also make additional staffing changes that we anticipate making in that time frame.
And Chris, those are all Entergy personnel, right?
As far as the 316?
And like going out into the wet field,
Those are all Entergy employee assumptions, is that right?
Yeah, that's all folks on site. So generally that's comprised of, the way we look at it is largely the security force and then everybody else in terms of identifying what the actual breakdown is for the staffing out through the next several years. And that's really all I was going to present, Chris. So if there's any questions from anybody on the panel, happy to take questions.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yes, Bill.
So you mentioned the breakdown of those employees. That would be an interesting thing to have a sense of what kind of employees are among those 316, 127, and 58. You mentioned security would be a large fraction of the 58, for example. If you could provide that as an estimate as to what their job duties would be. It could be as simple a structure as operations, environmental monitoring, radiation protection, security, something of that nature.
Okay, are you looking for like the time period right now or future state or what?
Well, there's 3 different states.
Yeah. So right now, so I mentioned we're at 3, whatever the number was earlier, 3. I'll say moving towards 312, whatever we're at right now. Of that, I'll say about 2/3 of that, a little more 2/3 of that are what I call professional staff. So management, technical operators, maintenance, engineering, and then about 1/3 of it is a good rough estimate of security. When you move out to the next block there, so let me back up one. When you move out to the wet fuel cool management, about 127 or so folks. The professional staff is significantly reduced, so that 127 nominally represents about 40 staff positions, and the bulk of it being the security force. And then when you go out even further, it's almost exclusively security. So, as example, I went out and I visited the Yankee Road plant about a month or so ago, 5-6 weeks ago, or something like that. And they have a few professional staff members there, and they have a security team. And the security team, because all their fuel is in dry fuel storage casks on a pad, the security team there both protects the fuel and does the routine monitoring of that fuel. And so as a result of that, they don't have really an operational force at that point. But that's 5 years out from where we are right now.
Now you're going to have a very large collection of structures that are still radioactively contaminated and could have some gradual or other releases from them. How many people would be responsible for environmental monitoring, for example? during this phase?
Well, let me take this one piece at a time. You know, the potential for environmental release, you know, we're doing a lot there. You know, I made mention of system draining, you know, and things like that. Really, we're taking all the water out of all the pipes that we're not using. So, you know, I would say the opportunity for something like that is so significantly diminished. It's just, you know, just I can't state the reduction from, you know, a pressurized system to become unpressurized, to be drained, so there is nothing to leak out. There is nothing to be released. And the operational footprint, so to speak, is really confined to the fuel pool cooling systems, standby fuel pool cooling systems in our reactor building versus the whole footprint of the power plant. So really the chance of something from that perspective, a release, is significantly diminished. That being said, we have, you know, program requirements. We made reference to ongoing monitoring, and we have a radiation protection department that is properly staffed for this next window of time. We'll continue to have, I think we have 12 radiation protection technicians in that department. I don't recall specifically how many environmental folks, but a couple, and we really only have about 4 or so when we're operating. So, you know, it's I think that by our benchmarking and our analysis is the right head count to implement the program.
I had heard that at some point you were going to close the Ferry Road headquarters and move everybody down to the plant site. Is that happening? And if so, what are the plans for that Ferry Road building ultimately?
In the near term, we are not. There's 2 buildings there, right? There's the you know, I'll say the building that the Joint Information Center is in, the Emergency Planning Department is currently located in. We have some professional staff upstairs in that building as well. That building will remain functional certainly between now and April of 2016. The adjacent training building is essentially empty right now. That is part of our emergency operating facility, and it will remain as such through April of 2016 as a minimum. So while we may turn down the thermostat in that building, we're going to continue to make sure that it's fully available for us if needed between now and April of 2016. And we will in fact use it periodically for emergency plan drills and practices, and there's an exercise, there's actually an emergency plan exercise in May of this year coming up. So really between now and April 2016, no change in terms of being in a position to hand off, sell, or otherwise get rid of that property. Between now and then, we need to come up with a plan for what we're going to do with that. And you know, we have to really go through the options of all our real estate. We own those buildings. We have a couple of buildings on Governor Hunt Road, actually individual homes that we have purchased for one reason or another over the years that we have to disposition as well. You want to buy it?
If you need
just give me a gavel.
If you need help in figuring out how to turn the thermostat down, I know you can talk to the hotel engineer, because they seem to have that down pretty well. Other questions? So, Chris, one I have is, you mentioned taking down some outbuildings or other you know, buildings that are associated with this. Just, and the level of detail is such that I didn't see this in the PSDAR, but are those considered part of the decommissioning, and are they funded from decommissioning? And do they, once they're done, does that count against like additional work?
You know, I mean, simple math is we should all think that really everything we do on site from today forward, really before today forward, is getting funded from decommissioning, right? That means this power plant makes no revenue, right? We make no revenue, right?
I just meant, well, oh, you're gonna force me to go there. What I was thinking was, you know how you have 838 million or something like that necessary for the fund to grow to do the radiological decommission.
Okay, I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
If these pieces come out, now they may not be very much, but do they count toward meeting that need? or are they?
Yes. Let me see if I can help you out here.
Yeah, thanks.
We've done a cost-benefit analysis, and by taking these buildings down, they allow us to make changes in our staffing that save us money in the long term. So they will pay for themselves very quickly. The money we spend taking these buildings down will pay back in a short term.
So I'll leave that there. Any other questions, Bill?
So you've had identified some funding for emergency planning through fiscal year 15, which ends in 4 months or 5 years. What are the plans after that?
Well, I'm actually not the expert on that, Bill, but I believe the state develops a budget and they submit it. And then the state either approves it or they don't, right? So, and then they send us a bill. I'm pretty sure that's how that's working, right? So I can't tell you more than that. Maybe Chris can enlighten us.
Oh, I probably could a little bit, but
well, and I do think that the reference to the fiscal year was actually the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2016, not to the one ending.
Well, it said for FY15.
Well, fiscal year beginning in 15.
So July 1st,
which would be 15 and 16.
I'm sorry, that was
to June 30th, 2016, which covers best. Okay.
That's your next one.
Okay, that's important because you've already identified that you have responsibilities for emergency planning through April 2016.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, so I would like everybody to remember that the first 3 meetings, I was able to keep us on time the whole time. And I'm not doing so well this meeting. On the other hand, I think this has been an important discussion for both NRC folks and to hear the current status. And I also, I know we've said this before, but for me, I just want to say again, thank you for operating the plant safely. Thank you for shutting it down safely. And thank you for defueling it safely. We appreciate that. So I'm going to make an executive decision here that in order to catch up, I'm going to take off the agenda what we put on the agenda, which should solve a couple of problems at the same time. Unless anyone objects to that. I will summarize by saying, I think next month we will be present at the PSDAR hearing. We'll give you our comments verbally, summarize what we have submitted in writing already. I just will say on the emergency planning zone, you've heard, from Chris's presentation that, in April 2016, things are proposed to change. And I'll just summarize by saying, Vermont doesn't agree with that. We've made that clear before, and we'll continue to provide, comments and thoughts on that. But I think that will, by skipping that agenda item now, we'll almost be back on time.
Can I just
Yes,
make one
you may.
comment about that?
Yes.
It still doesn't solve taking it off doesn't
Solve the problem of how it got on. Right.
And I think I have a couple of concerns. One, it was, again, very short notice. 2, we really haven't had a presentation from Entergy in depth about what the plan is. I know in October we talked about it for about 10 minutes. So part of my concern was putting something on the agenda where we were going to hear comments when we didn't hear the plan.
Yep,
I mean, that's one of my things, and I think Entergy should have been able to present what they're thinking. I'm also a little concerned because the way I understand it, originally the comments were due January 8th or something, or 9th. Mm-hmm. Now they're due February 9th, but we didn't even talk about this on our December meeting.
Right.
And I get a little concerned, and I'm a lay person, like some of you guys spend most of your time, dealing with this. And sort of as a lay person, I'm not aware of what the schedule for, what reports are being issued and when public comments are need to be in. So I don't know if this panel, and maybe that's not our role, but if there are people on this panel, like obviously the state agencies knew that there was a deadline and it was coming up, and it never came up here prior. So I don't know moving forward if there's a way that the panel can be updated on like, here's what's happening and here's when public comments are due, because I think that's part of what we're supposed to be doing is hearing from the public. So I guess I have two concerns. Is one, we need to hear what the plan is before we hear comments on it. And two, is there a way that we can be up to date? You know, because once again, now we're in a situation where there's public comments, and I know it's the NRC looking for the comments and not the state. So, but you know, if we could somehow make sure we're doing things in an order that works.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, but I want to say a couple of things about it. One is in the last 4 months has been a lot happening very fast, and a lot of it has been driven by filings that have been made with the NRC that we have to respond to. In some respects, this was put on to try and give you an update as to what we were doing, but your point is pretty well taken in the sense that, you know, we're meeting once a month. These have been pretty packed agendas so far, and we have deadlines that we have to meet. We've had filings that we have had to do with the NRC in response to filings that were made by Entergy or exemption requests or things that continue to move. So, and I do think the emergency planning piece of this and what happens in the future is relevant to the panel's work. I think this is something you would want to know about and comment on. But unless you are going to meet weekly for the last month, we have some serious time crunches, and this will be. If we can't discuss it tonight because of timing, then we also will be filing comments before we meet again. We just have to. So.
No, I just sort of mean like, because to me, and I know there are certain deadlines, but that's sort of my point.
Yeah.
We know what the deadlines are. Certain people know what the deadlines are. You know what I mean? I don't spend my day being able to keep track of the deadlines. So I think it's just if there's a way that we can, move it in a way that if we know there's a deadline, at least let us know when the deadline is. And also give Entergy the opportunity to present what they've presented. And I get it. Everybody has like other things or, that we're doing. Everybody's trying to multitask, but if there's some way we can,
I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think after this step with the PSDAR and the current filings that are out there on emergency planning, that things do settle down a little bit in terms of schedule, so they'll match better, I think, this panel's meeting schedule. It just has been a really tight time with a lot of different things going on, and some of the dates we're not finding out about until like it's upon us. So there's some of that going on too. But your point is, I think, good, and I think we can do better.
Hey, Chris, just to briefly follow on Kate's point, I mean, one of the challenges that we're facing is, while we appreciate the attention that the state agencies are able to give to this, I know each of the state commissioners who are here, you guys have a lot of other things on your plate. The problem is at the local level, just as you guys are just finding out about stuff, so oftentimes we don't find out about things at all because we don't have the resources to track this stuff either. And we've got to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's going to come back to the state. Because right now you got to assume the mantle of being the stewards of this process. And to the extent that at the local level, we're finding out about stuff after the fact or right before deadlines are due, or having to kind of sometimes tap on the shoulder of the state to say, hey, this is coming. We're happy to bear part of the burden, but we've also got to have resources to bear part of the burden, but we've got to figure this out. And hopefully that's part of what this committee will do. We're looking at how IndyCap should function, how it should be resourced, because it's really challenging. And so I'm not casting aspersions, but it's just right now, and I know we're in a busy time. This is also a really critically busy time, and there are some busy things coming up, like with the second ISTC application and other things. So Anyway, I just want to, but I really appreciate the time you guys have been able to give to it, but I think you've also maybe assumed more responsibility than you should, or than you can.
If I recall, there's a process the NRC has where filings, requests, other actions on the Vermont Yankee docket, you can be notified of those automatically. If we could incorporate that into a distribution list of the panel members, at the time that the NRC receives a filing or some action on this license is made, at least there would be something that tickled everyone here to say, a document's been released, a filing has been processed, or a comment is being requested, and if people have the opportunity and the time to then take a look at that, they might raise questions at these meetings around this. Is that something that you could help with?
As state nuclear liaison, I get notices of things I'm not always sure are public notices. So I know the list you're talking about, and I guess I'll ask NRC's help, the Region 1's office, in terms of figuring out whether that is, whether there's a public listserv, if you will, that we can get on.
I'll say Joe Lynch with Entergy has been helpful with that too.
Well, I mean, a filing was made by Entergy on Monday for another exemption request, and I didn't hear that. You guys can say what you file as well as I can, so you're on the panel. So, but I hear you, and I think we can do better, but it does need to get better. I just can tell you that we're pretty flat out and trying to figure out what we're responding to by when.
I guess that's what I was trying to say. I mean, I know you are, so we got to figure this. We just got to. So I wasn't trying to cast aspersions.
No, didn't take it that way.
Yes,
I didn't. So appreciate that.
Chris, if I can add something to that.
Tony, yep.
Now, there are a number of NRC listservs which provide public information, and pretty much anyone can sign up for them. When I took this job, I was handed probably a half a dozen listservs, and I would say that maybe a third of them provide information that I really don't need to see. Because it's dealing with plants that are in other parts of the country. So one of the things that is on my list to do is to liaison with Region 1 NRC office. So Doug, I'll be talking to you and Nancy about this. Is I do want to what I'm calling rationalizing the listserv process because I think. From our perspective, it's a little unwieldy right now. So I want to get a better picture of what I need, what listservs I really need to be on now that the plant is being decommissioned, and what hopefully I can drop. And also, I know that there are other representatives in other state agencies are on some of these listservs, what they are on, and let's make certain that we communicate this a little bit better. And certainly to answer Kate's question, once we've done that, it would be a very simple process to make certain that the panelists are notified of this as well.
Wouldn't it be simple to get us on that listserv, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it anymore in the future?
Yep.
But Jim, I mean, it's kind of like the role we played during Irene. I mean, not to draw too much of a parallel, but just somebody who can take this information and make plain English sense out of it, so that people actually know what the hell. I mean, is it going to be new reg hearing on blah 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 blah? It's going to be Greek to most of us, and we need somebody who can say, this is what this is about in plain English, and this is the history of it. Here's what you.
Chris, that really is part of my job description.
But man, you're busy. You're flat out too. I mean, that's why we've got to have the discussion of what resources this thing really needs.
Yes, but that's why I want to rationalize the listserv, so I can look at what is absolutely needed, and then the stuff that really isn't of concern to the people of Vermont and, the people in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, I don't even get. Sure. So,
all right, so I think it's a good discussion, and it's kind of a nice lead-in into the governance panel charter and description of where we are. Catherine, are you still on?
I am. I can barely hear you, Commissioner Recchia, but I think I heard you want me to go ahead and launch this next presentation on the charter.
Yep, I think we should do that, and we can hear you fine. So
okay, good.
Go right ahead, and we'll be changing slides, I think, as we go along here.
Okay, great. Well, sorry not to be there. I know this isn't ideal, but Southwest Airlines let me down today, and I did get to eat my dinner while you were talking earlier. That was the benefit. So
good. That's one of them.
I would like to just clarify that I'm presenting this on behalf of the Governance Committee, which was created, I think, back in October. That's Martin Langeveld, Mike Hebert, Jim Atto, Mike Toomey, and Chris Campany. And I want to invite all of you on that Governance Committee to please jump in at any point in this presentation to add, correct, or edit me. The governance, as you'll recall, I developed a straw proposal for a charter, I think as early as September, perhaps, and presented that to the full INDICAP at an earlier meeting. And at that point, the governance committee was created to review it further and make recommendations, and that's what I'm going to be presenting on their behalf. So these are consensus recommendations that built on that strong proposal. And the first slide, Tony, if you want to go to that, is just a quick overview of what is contained in that charter. Everybody should have received a copy of the charter as proposed.
Actually,
elements of it.
Catherine, give me a second. Does anyone else need Does anyone need a paper version of this? Because we have that here.
Hold on, we have a minor snafu here. Joe?
I got the...
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Are we moving forward?
Yes, next slide.
Okay, you see the overview of the charter at this point?
Whoops.
Yes, overview of charter.
Okay.
No, wait, hold on. We lost it again. There we go.
Well, I think you can move to the next slide then. Most of these topics are topics that were addressed directly in the enabling statute. So it's really just a reiteration and confirmation of what was stated there. What I've highlighted here in these slides are only things that amplify that statute, or I think that's a good term, amplify it, because in many cases there were discussions about actually adding language which might have been somewhat in contradiction or at least not confirmed by the legislation, and those are issues that we're holding off on for legislative proposals, so we'll get to that at the end. The first issue, and I've tried to, again, tie this directly to the charter document. The first issue is on page 3, and you might recall that in the original straw proposal there was some discussion about alternates and whether alternates could attend meetings and in what conditions. I think the governance committee said that really the term alternates wasn't appropriate. There are situations where designees are allowed, particularly, and that is for the 4 state agencies. And for those entities, they are really the only ones that are allowed to have individuals representing the appointed officials, other appointed members, other than themselves. And the idea in this language that was added is that those designees should be made as permanent as possible, and alternates really would only be brought in very unique situations. And again, the emphasis is on creating a consistent presence in the membership. I'm going to keep rolling through this, so Tony, you're just going to have to signal me if somebody has a question or somebody wants to add something.
Yeah, Catherine, if you can just say next slide when you want us to go to next slide, I can do that.
Okay. All right. The committee assignments. There was really no particular language in the statute regarding committees and the use of committees. So this was added to give the chair, co-chairs, vice chair discretion to appoint committees as working members who are not decision-making entities, but they can develop recommendations just as this governance committee has done and make those recommendations for a decision by the NCAP. One other new addition was that the members of a committee could be designated from outside of the panel's members. So it could be the decision of the chair to appoint somebody who might be an expert in a particular topic for a committee on that topic, for instance. There was a question along the way about whether the open meeting law applied to committee meetings of, say, only 5 or 6 people. And we did get an opinion on that by the Attorney General, and indeed, these committee meetings have to be treated as if they're covered by the open meeting law, which means they have to be noticed a day in advance, and the public would have to know that they had access to a phone number if it's a phone call, or could be present at the meeting. So that information has to be posted, or at least some avenue for getting that information to interested public would have to be provided. So next slide. The next slide talks a bit about, if I have it right, the agendas and the first in the decision-making process. But the first one goes to the question of having it says emergency meetings in the language in the charter. It was changed to special meetings, so you could have a special meeting if an urgent topic came up. And the decision was that it really doesn't, since the notice requirement is only a day, that indeed 5 panelists or the leadership of the NDCAP could call such a meeting if needed. On the agendas, as we have done in this case, in the development of this agenda, the chair and the vice chair developed the agenda and then circulated it to the panelists so that they can have additional input on that agenda before it's finalized. Once it's finalized and the meeting is opened, any new agenda items would have to be considered at the beginning of that meeting, with the caveat that if there was an action or a decision to be taken on that particular agenda item, it should be delayed to a later meeting, so that people who hadn't been noticed were prepared to deliberate on that issue would have an additional opportunity. And then, of course, I guess the chair would have, with this language, the chair would have the prerogative to say that this is an urgent issue, we do have to move on it quickly for some reason. The Governance Committee adopted the recommendation that the NCAP should strive to reach consensus on really important issues, and that voting, which is majority voting, which would be the decision-making tool as a backstop, would be used if it was found that the group could not reach consensus in a timely manner. So next slide. Minority positions are not addressed also, but if there is, for instance, a situation where we either don't reach consensus and there's a vote, but the record could reflect a minority position of some of the members, so that the record shows that there was a full debate and there were alternative positions. Then there are a number of bullets here under the topic of public engagement. And this goes to just clarifying in the charter that the public all the meetings are obviously open to the public, but that there will be concerted efforts to make an opportunity for public comment at the meetings, and usually more than once, that has been happening at these past meetings. And in addition, written comment would be allowed at any point over any issue at any time. I think there has to be some process established for where those written comments will be sent, or how they should be submitted. But this goes on to say that the NDCAP will make a concerted effort to actively solicit comments on any recommendations or reports that they're considering, such as the site assessment report and PSDAR, which we've been discussing. To the extent that they can, they would also agree that they'd like to be able to acknowledge the public comments and show how they were treated in any ultimate decisions or final reports. And then finally, there was a provision added to say that the NDCAP may decide to provide public engagement opportunities outside of its scheduled meetings. That might be in the form of these technical workshops. It might take the form of a special issue forum, but they wanted to provide that opportunity. And then the last slide is just a simple statement that clarifying that public records will include any correspondence or exchanges between the NDCAP members and with stakeholders outside of the panel. So that really summarizes the key elements, and I would again ask the governance committee members if they had anything they wanted to add or clarify.
Any comments?
And if not, certainly if there's any questions.
Governance committee people or questions?
I have a question. And maybe we don't have to do this, but it doesn't say anywhere, and I'm looking at this like as a public document that somebody who doesn't know us is going to see. Do we have to say somewhere that we were established, like in state statute, like who put us together, so we're not just like this random group of people that decided to come together? You know what I mean? Should it say that just in the beginning somewhere, like decommissioning panel is established by, you know, Act 78 of the Vermont legislature, Vermont state statute, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think it should actually, reference the statute and describe that all these things are intended to explain or augment the statutory charges, not change them, so that if there's ever a question, people understand that the statute governs.
That was my concern, because if you look at the state statute's duties are different than the duty, I mean, they sort of are the same, but the language is totally different than the duties that we've listed in our charter, and we've actually added some, you know what I mean? So I just don't know if we have to work that out so that we're not, people aren't looking at two conflicting things and going, which one of these? Chris?
Yes.
I apologize, I couldn't hear everything that she said that was after that comment. I did hear the reference to the statute should be noted in the, I assume, the purpose section, number 1. And then I didn't hear the further comment about the duties.
That was pretty much it. I think the duties, the concept was that to the extent that they're augmented here, you know, the statute really governs, so you've got to make sure that the statute it's clear to people that if they see something here, they understand where it comes from. So that was the main point.
Okay.
Chris,
Go ahead.
I just
Senator.
wanted to either recommend or make a motion that the governance committee take those ideas and put them in here and bring them back at our next meeting.
Okay, I have a motion for that. And
I'm not seconding it. I'm going to offer an amendment when we're done.
okay, can I actually, we have a motion on the table. Could I get a second for that? So the concept here, the motion is to ask the governance committee to take whatever comments people get right now and go back again. So I've got a motion from Senator Kelly and a second by Chris Campany. So, Jim.
I would like to suggest a move as a committee member, unless the others disagree, that for that kind of a change that's been discussed, that we could agree to that right now. I don't think we need to wait. I don't know what the other committee members think.
I have just a question. One of the things that Ms. O'Connor mentioned was that there needed to be a careful understanding of the regulation or the statute against the additional things that were mentioned here. And I think that it is important to somehow make it clear that where there has been additional items added here, that I guess the statute is the governing document, or what were you trying to actually say there?
Well, if you look at, because I took the,
I didn't hear you very
oh
well.
yeah, I'm sorry. The duties that are in the Vermont statute
Yes.
are they're here in our charter, but
Yes.
they're written differently.
Yes,
The
they are.
language is different.
Yeah, and we've gone beyond that here.
Yeah, and some of the things, you know, one of the things that I noticed, and it's written in the purpose, very, you know, we have it in our charter purpose, I'm sorry. We have it in our charter purpose that we're only an advisory panel. But under the state statute, that's written under duties, and it's written a little differently. So my whole point is, just so when somebody is looking at this from the public and getting on our website, they, you know, what's the difference between our charter and what's the difference between state statute that actually says what we're supposed to do? You know, that's just my concern, because you know, you compare the two, and I mean, I'm assuming we are governed by the duties that the state statute lays out for us.
Yes, Mike?
I think it's reasonable for the committee to take one more whack at that and to make sure that you know, that we haven't gone too far overboard with the language. But I do want to say that in the discussions that we had, we were pretty careful not to go beyond. There were some things that were sort of put on the table to say, well, should we add this duty or that duty? And we pretty much said, no, because the statute doesn't permit us to go there. You know, we'd have to go back and ask for authorization. So I don't have them in front of me. You've compared, but I think they're really pretty close. Maybe there's some rewording.
And it could just be as simple as saying we were formed by, you know, under Act 178 in the legislature.
Chris?
So we can go back and revisit it, but I would also just kind of talk about the message, the motion that's on the table, Jim's friendly amendment, and Steve's comment. If you think about who all was on the committee, I don't know that he was practicing law in Vermont, but Michael Toomey, I would say, a very capable legal mind. I don't know how he...
I was absolutely not practicing law in Vermont.
Shucks, almost had it.
That's on the record.
But I guess I would just say, I mean, I think we're pretty darn careful about not getting sideways or proposing things that were not in statute. And while we can certainly take, I mean, I'm happy to discuss it again. I would also say if people are comfortable moving forward, let's move forward with the understanding that we will add additional language that says this panel duly created under statute, under VSA, yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
But I mean, if folk are otherwise comfortable with it, I would just suggest we move on.
Okay. Well, let me ask, were there other substantive questions or comments that we might not be able to resolve tonight? Just because, I mean, let's get them on the table, and then I'll ask Senator Kelly whether she wants to adjust her motion. But right now, let's keep going.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think that the governance committee could go back with some other questions or recommendations or suggestions. And the one that I have is about public records. The clause relative to specifically on page 5, the records of NDCAP consist of the charter, agendas, minutes, reports, studies, and correspondence to or from the NDCAP members and stakeholders. I think something needs to define, to narrow that. I can tell you that just about everybody on this panel I have or will correspond with, and it will not be NDCAP business. And this clause leaves it open that any communications that I have with anyone here could be questioned as relevant for discovery by this particular charter. And so if we could make it so that it was specific to NDCAP business in some way with the governance committee looking at the language for that, that would be appreciated.
I I agree with that. I don't remember any discussion about this subparagraph E, and I'm not sure where that came from. I guess it was in a draft that was circulated, but you know, we don't even define what stakeholders means. Right? Is stakeholders everybody? So I think we probably do have some more work to do on tightening up subparagraph E. We're planning to meet again next month, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it would be we would be well advised to wait a month to revolve, take into consideration the comments that were made today on the record and review the charter once again and bring it up as a voting item next month.
Right. And can I also just say on that point about the public records, that for those of us who are state agency employees, I'll say this for the record, the public records are much broader than that. I can't think of we have some executive privilege between the commissioners and the executive branch, the governor's office, and we have some confidential correspondence that sometimes occurs, but for the most part, I think almost everything I do is public record and would be releasable under a public records request. So any communication I have with any of you, this is your fair warning, any communication I have with any of you, regardless of whether it's with the panel as a whole, is likely to be a public record. So I'm not sure that how this fits into that, but.
Well, I think that's right for you, but
right.
I think we have to make it clear. Chris Lamser and I work for the same company.
Right.
We happen to also be NDCAP members.
Right.
I would expect that correspondence between us on official NDCAP business under some limited circumstances might be a public record.
Mm-hmm.
But the overwhelming majority of correspondence between us on company business is not public record. And participation in this panel can't make it public record.
Right.
Or we're going to have 17 members instead of 19 members. So we probably need to clarify that.
Okay. Are there any other issues that people see now? And since it looks like Senator Kelly's motion will stand, then
Chris?
Catherine?
Chris, I had sorry to interrupt, Chris, but
okay,
I have a couple comments.
Yep.
When you're ready.
Okay, one thing I'm going to say is I'm looking around and thinking I want to practice the new mechanism that's in these, even though that's not official. Can I just get consensus that people are happy with or can live with the idea of the governance panel committee taking another shot at this?
Yeah. We just need to call for a vote on the senator's motion.
So I can do the vote. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to do the vote thing anyway. But Catherine, do you have comments before I close this?
Yeah, it's Pat.
Sorry, Pat.
Two comments. It seems like in section 4 in meetings, we should reference that meetings could take place electronically and or via webinar so that we can assure that what we're all doing tonight is legal. And then second, it would seem the public records law can give us some clarity on the correspondence question. I'm no attorney, but perhaps there's some clarity there we could.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I'm sorry, Pat. I thought that was Catherine. Any other comments from anyone else on the phone?
I just wanted to raise for a discussion, a comment that was received by David Dean. I understand he's not in attendance tonight or on the phone
right.
or the webinar. Okay. Well, I'm speaking without his authorization on his behalf, but he did raise a comment that was discussed by the governance committee and set aside for further discussion tonight. And we thought he might be here to bring it up. And that was his recommendation that some language be inserted regarding the selection of the chair to say that the chair, or at least one of the co-chairs, would preferably be selected from among the citizen members of the panel. And I think the governance committee felt, and they can speak for themselves, but felt that that was beyond the statute's intent, and set it aside.
Anyone from the governance committee want to discuss that? I know that.
Well, I would recommend we discuss it next month.
Yeah, with David here.
Two reasons. One, because that's when we'll be talking about voting on it. And secondly, David presumably will be here.
Yeah. All right, Catherine, we're gonna postpone that to next month. All right, so.
Okay.
All right, so Senator Kelly's motion on the table, seconded by, I think it was Chris, to recommend that these changes be considered by the governance committee and come back next month. I see a lot of nods, so I can do the consensus thing, but we have a motion, so we're going to do a vote too. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, the motion carries, and thank you, Governance Committee, for continuing to work on that.
Chris, I just want to make sure my vote was reported as an aye, not as opposed.
Yes, yes, it was.
It's all delayed sounding to me on this webinar, but I just wanted to be clear, I'm in favor.
Thank you very much.
There was one more slide that I wanted to share, and this was regarding possible legislative changes. I want to make it clear that these are not recommendations of the Governance Committee. These were issues that were discussed by the Governance Committee, and it was determined that they really couldn't be incorporated into a charter unless there were changes to the statutes that allowed for them explicitly. So I don't know if you have that slide up. There were just 4 bullets there. One regarding the purpose, to expand the purpose of the NDCAP to serve an advisory capacity to the Vermont Yankee nuclear power station owners, in addition to all the other bodies that are listed in the statute. I don't know that we need to discuss this tonight. I just do want to bring it up, though, for your attention, because it's something that would have to be integrated into the annual report as well, which is the next topic. Duties would be expanded to include that the NDCAP could also take on other duties as adopted by the majority of the panelists and consistent with the statutory charge. There was discussion about whether or not there was the need for some sort of sunset clause for the NDCAP to be included in the charter. It's not mentioned in the legislation. They bounced around a couple of possible dates, but this is, again, just more conceptual, that is there a need to include some end date that would either be determined or be determined by the legislation, could be obviously overridden by the legislature, or the panelists who at that point might decide at the end of that sunset clause whether or not they want to make a recommendation to continue. And finally, there was the question raised at one of the earlier meetings about whether or not we should include, as part of the administrative capacity of the NDCAP, the Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, since they have a role in, I think, Chris Campany, this was one of your suggestions a while back. So they are not listed in the legislation, and that would be a recommendation to the legislature to include them if it was the favor of the whole NDCAP. So those were possible legislative changes that would need to be considered in your as part of your annual report, and I understand we don't have time to talk about them tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think we do need to consider these in the context of the annual report, which I am wondering how best to deal with the last 25 minutes we have here. I know that we were going to talk about nominations for chair, and so that people could consider that and then vote on those toward the end of the meeting, and then talk about the annual report outline. Let me ask what the pleasure of the committee is. Do you want to just go right on to the outline, try and do that in about 10 minutes, and then come back and do nominations and election in one shot, or do you want to do it the way it is on the agenda?
Chris?
Yes.
I know there was time here, was that open comment to the public?
Right. Yes, we also have to have some time still for the public, any remaining comments that they have. Since we're not adopting the charter, I think what we're going to try and do is have just an open comment period on any other issues that people have toward the end here, but I want to reserve at least 10 minutes for that. So we basically have 10 minutes to do the rest of the work that we need to do.
Suggest we do the nominations.
Do the nominations now? Okay. So let's move to the nominations for chair and vice chair. I'll say it's been delightful, but I agree with the concept of trying to find somebody, the general public, to do this. And I don't mean that in a mean-spirited way. We will continue to help them, and the department will continue to provide administrative and support for the panel as needed. But I think that as a citizens advisory panel, it would be most helpful to do that. And so I think I'd like to nominate Kate O'Connor, even though she's still in the room and could have been. But I think Kate would do a good job tonight. But I would nominate her for chair and see if, are there any other nominations though? Go ahead, David.
I'd like to nominate Martin Langvale for vice chair.
So we got chair and vice chair.
It won't hurt my feelings if someone else wants to be chair.
I'd also like to nominate Kate O'Connor.
Okay. Are there any other nominations for either chair or vice chair? Do you guys want to?
Nominations. Do you have a second? I'll second.
Great, thank you. Do you guys want to say anything on your behalf? You can't say anything. You can't say, I'm not going to let you say anything that gets you out of it at this point. No, just teasing.
Well, and we talked about this. Chris and I are going to talk further because, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to, I don't know, take one for the team, I guess, and do it. We just literally had this 2-second conversation about just making sure that we can do it right. Because I don't want to do anything and not have it done right. So, we can have a conversation about how it can work support-wise, and Martin and I can have conversations, but for me, I want to do it correctly. So if you want to impeach me at the March meeting, you can do it if it doesn't work, but.
Do we need to add articles of impeachment?
Yes.
Wow, that was short.
Well, it sounds like, Martin, did you want to say anything?
No,
Okay.
You have nobody running against you.
Exactly. So I think we'll do this in one ticket. We've got chair and vice chair proposed, and moved by David and seconded by Chris. So any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Martin and I say no.
Right. Abstentions? Well, congratulations and thank you. I told Kate I was...
Congratulations.
I told Kate I'd be happy to have that discussion she wanted to have as long as it occurred after she was elected. So, no, that's good. So I think I will, I guess I'll continue running the meeting through the end. But I thank you all very much because it really is a pleasure to work with you. And I'll continue to be on the panel and supporting it. All right, Catherine, you want to move on to the annual report outline?
Very quickly, I can do that. There was not much guidance in the statute about the annual report other than that you must do it. And that there would be, that would be one of the opportunities for you to make any recommendations about issues such as changes to the constitution of the panel or the membership, and that any advice that you wanted to provide to the Governor and the Energy Committee to the General Assembly. So with that, I took a stab at trying to consider what you might want to have included. If you've got that PDF file up with the outline that I distributed in advance,
Yeah, we're working on it.
it's pretty strict. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's a a background of your statutory authority and what your role is, a reference to the charter, which would be included in the appendix, so not a lengthy description there, but maybe something about the process for its adoption. Any recommendations that you want to make to the statute, as we referenced, and I just referenced some of the possibilities there. And then with regard to the meetings that you've had to date, I think one way to approach that would be to have a very brief summary of the key items that you've taken up, not on a meeting-by-meeting basis, but really look at it more holistically from what the issues that the INDICAP has taken on from its inception in September. And then I think, there's a public record out there. Obviously, we can either put in the appendix all of the meeting agendas and all the meeting summaries, or we can reference the links to the website to make this much simpler. The two big issues that you've taken on are the site assessments and the PSDAR, so I wanted to reference those and have an opportunity to put some type of summary about the content of those two and how what the comments were. Now, this is, I think, a question for you as to, again, how much you wanted included in the text versus how much you would like to have just referenced and put into an appendix. And then finally, the last would be any progress that you made on the question about the resources and financial needs for the handicap, and if possible, some indication of a work plan for 2015. And again, we haven't really made any accommodations for coming up with that work plan, but that's something that we could do potentially in the next month. So I hope I did that quickly, and I think there's, I'm looking for your input before I start actually filling this out and drafting it, your input on whether there's big gaps here and kind of the level of detail you're looking for.
Any thoughts? Yes.
Chris, if I recall your letter asking permission to put on this report later on in the calendar didn't have a date on it.
It did. I think it said February.
It did?
Which, yes.
February 15th.
Right, which I am prepared to take David Dean up on his acknowledgement that that there is no jail for people who submit legislative reports late, rather than, again, ask for an extension. But I can tell if this is where you're headed. I mean, this isn't even drafted yet, so.
Well, and I guess the point I wanted to make is there are a couple of important pieces in this, like the recommended changes to the statute and the resource idea. That may not get filled in, but certainly it would be a great opportunity to put in our recommendations for changes to the statute. And so,
do you feel like
be able to do that, before we submit the report?
Right. So I think what Catherine was planning on trying to do was to draft this, and to her credit, she was trying to meet the February 15th date. But it sounds like, you all tell me if you disagree, but I think that we should ask her to draft something for us to all look at, get it out to us, and then discuss it at next month's meeting and see if we're close enough to finalize it. And if I don't come to the next meeting, it's because David Dean was wrong, and somebody come bail me out of the Ledge Council thing. But I'll confess, it won't be the first report I didn't quite make exactly on time. How about you, David? Private record. You do, okay.
So I'm sorry, but what's the process for deciding
Hi, Chris.
what ought to go in the?
When there's a moment.
Yep, give me 1 second, Pat.
What's the process for deciding what will go in the document if there's not consensus on what it ought to be? Because at least I saw a couple of things up there that I have some concerns about. And are we going to have this hashed out in a committee? Are we going to have this discussed line by line? I just, obviously it's a significant document.
Significant issue.
And we would want to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah, I would anticipate discussing those things with the full panel and really trying to understand I mean, we'll all have different aspects of this that we have more sensitivity to than others, and see if we can convince our colleagues of the wisdom of our concerns, or, see where we are. But I think
We also talk about a minority report.
we can talk about a minority report as well, but I hate to start out our first annual report with that, but it's possible. So that's certainly an option. So I think let's approach it with the expectation that we'll go through really line by line, get a chance to explain what concerns we have. And then for that piece, I guess I'd recommend, and I'll actually talk with Kate about it since she'll be running the meeting, but I would think you would want to have a chunk of the discussion be, is this panel, I remember the statutory requests. Are there membership changes that should be made? Are there how is the panel working? Does it need any other duties or assignments statutorily? And we should talk about that and have a chunk of time where we can all talk about that. The four that are up there were really developed just, I think, out of Catherine's observations about things that are happening and are free to be added to and subtracted from or discussed. So, I don't know, that's how I would look at it being done. Do you want to weigh in on this at this point? No. Okay.
So we are delegating to Catherine to write the first draft of the report. That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah, that was my intent. Unless somebody wants to draft that, I was going to suggest she take the first shot at it, knowing that it would come back to you guys.
Is she going to draft this based on the minutes of the meetings?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I like Catherine, but I have a question.
Yep.
She hasn't been to all of the meetings.
Right.
She's not a member of the panel.
Right.
She's not a citizen of Vermont.
Right.
So I'm wondering how we ended up having her do the first draft of the report for the committee.
Okay.
I mean, for the panel as a whole.
Okay, and I guess I would answer that by saying she's a consultant to the department that we have hired her to help on various things, and if you want a report that somebody writes, it's Tony, me, or Catherine, and I think you're better off with Catherine.
Well, I guess my question is, it's not the department's report. It's the panel's report.
I am charged by the statute to provide administrative support to you. I am doing that. You can change the report, and please do. Or if somebody else wants to write it, I think that's an option. But I was trying to provide a vehicle by which the work could actually get done.
Well, I'm struggling a little bit, Mike, just to understand your concerns, because at this point, we haven't done anything as a committee or a panel, as far as that we're not making any recommendations to them for the most part, or to the extent they are, it's going to be a small subset of kind of charter-based legislative changes. And so I'm envisioning, to the extent that Catherine or whoever writes it up, is just essentially summarize what we talked about, not anything beyond that. So it's more of a Scrivener's kind of report. But if we want as a panel to send a message to the legislature that's more substantive, or the public, I agree. That is not something that we should delegate to a consultant at this point. We should figure out how to kind of have a subcommittee work on the content of it and figure out how we figure out staffing for writing it. But at this point, I'm thinking this is really just a summary of a set of meetings.
I agree with you for about 90% of it. I think that to the extent we're asking her to compile sort of the history of what happened in the sense of a report, I have no concerns. But if it's proposed legislative changes, I think we really need a committee that would have to discuss that of panel members with appropriate representation to see that all points of view are reflected from the beginning.
I agree with that.
Put us in a position of having to do a minority report.
There's also a financial needs piece of this. The same thing. I think we really do need to convene our little committee to bring back to the panel a recommendation on that. So I think, yeah, so with the, so maybe Catherine just writes, then Chris, just the summary of kind of what's happened. And then we'll have a couple of committees that will break off and do these other pieces that are the recommending parts.
Yep.
And I would just add that the recommendations to change the statute, the only thing that's been put forward so far are things that were discussed by the governance committee. These are not my recommendations. So I didn't, and they were not actually recommendations of the governance committee. There were just issues that came up in their discussion.
Right.
So I had thought there might be more time to have a fuller discussion of them tonight, but obviously without that, we can't move those forward.
Right, so I think we're gonna need some more time, but I think, yeah, Pat, go ahead, I was just gonna call on you, sorry.
Sorry, I mean, recognizing that we've already, I think, asked for one extension for this report. There's another thing to consider is maybe proceed with a summary of where we've been already, but indicate in the report that we haven't had a chance to have any kind of substantive discussion on possible changes to the statute. And that is a whole body of work in and of itself, whether it happens through a subcommittee or in a full panel discussion. I think we have to have a full panel discussion at some point, but also recognizing that our time to make any changes to the statute will whittle away here before too long. So maybe we just summarize and put the issues up. Here's where we've been. And frankly, I think on the financial needs and resources, I think we could probably come to agreement pretty quickly that we need some resources. I mean, we've already agreed to that. And maybe we can have a small group that looks at what those resources look like. But put the summary in and indicate that we need more time to talk about changes to the charter if appropriate. But to try to get something into the legislature by February 15 or shortly thereafter, but do a place card holder essentially on the charter changes and indicate that that's a larger discussion we haven't gotten to yet.
What's people's reaction to that?
Very, very good approach.
I think you have a consensus. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, that was a concern I was going to raise earlier on, is that Senator McDonald suggested we seek funding, and we should do that, but you folks are in the State House law, what's likely to be crossover date this year? If we're going to make anything about statutory changes, probably it's going to be March something, right?
Yeah, it's usually it used to be town meeting week, and then they extended it an extra week most of the time. So,
a month.
Yeah.
So that would mean that any legislative change is going to have to go through one house and cross to the other in 4 weeks from now. And I'm usually just a rosy optimist.
I know you are, yeah.
I don't know. And I think the funding is the key piece on that. And there's so much money this year, so we should.
Chris?
So the list that Catherine came up with, and looking at the annual report outline, I mean, those 4 items, I mean, I think a number of them could stand, some deliberation. Some of them may not require much at all, but to me, the most salient point is going to be the financial support needs of IndyCat and where that's coming from. I mean, to me, that's the most pressing issue. We could even say we will come back to you at some later date on these other potential legislative changes, but it's the financial piece that we've got to get before the legislature quickly.
Well,
I know it's a really crappy time to do it, but
you all have. I mean, we did establish.
We got a committee.
We got a committee. The committee needs to meet. We can do that, but I'll tell you, I don't know what your inclination is or thinking is about the breadth of financial assistance that you need. So
well, that's what we got to figure out.
We have to talk. Yeah, we have to talk. We have to do it as a committee and then bring it to the full panel. And I'd ask you all to think about what things you feel like you need to make this work well.
Well, and I'll offer this. We've only been meeting as a panel since last fall, right? So and the organization doesn't even have a charter yet. So at one level, seeking substantive changes to the duties or the scope or the responsibilities of the panel, I actually think it's a little premature and maybe something that ends up taking a long time to try to get consensus on. I don't think there's any dispute with anybody on a summary of what happened in the first handle, the first 4 or 5 meetings, and that we need some money from the legislature. I think you could almost do that by acclamation tonight, that whatever the legislature is willing to give you for funding the activities of the panel is a good thing. I think that's controversial. So at least for consideration for the committee, if we want to do something quick that's not controversial, if we can confine those discussions to a summary, the report to be a summary of what has happened and a request for financial support for the panel, that should be relatively simple to do. Anything beyond that could be more complicated.
And that is similar to what Pat had suggested. And so the question is, if we have Catherine work on that, a summary of what we've done to date, and the question is, do you want to do that by email and try and get it in through, February 15th time frame, or do you want to have a meeting on that again? And we're going to need to obviously fit the financial piece
Do what by
into
email?
that.
Do what by email?
Reviewing the report.
As long as Catherine, within the public meeting law.
Yeah. It would be available.
I think that should be done. You could even post it on your website.
Yeah, we can post drafts on and get comments.
It should largely be a reflection of the minutes that we approved for the first 4 or 5 meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at that outline, there was only 3 of the 8 things that you could say have any kind of completion. The rest are drafts, and a simple statement that there's work yet to be done, it's been started, but that's for year 2.
Yeah. Okay.
It should be a brief annual report.
All right, we'll work on that. Seeing heads nodding, and everybody okay with that concept?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we're doing
Chris,
the
just for
consensus.
my benefit, I do want to verify, we're trying to finish this portion of the report by February 15th.
We're going to try and draft this, send it around by email, get comments, post it, get comments from the public if anyone wants to respond. And we'll assess, I have no idea at this point whether we can make the February 15th timeframe, but maybe we'll be close. But I'm hearing that people don't necessarily want to wait till next meeting, the March meeting, to finish this.
Yes.
Okay. And in the meantime, in that same time frame, the finance people will meet and talk about what we need, and we'll probably end up doing that by email too, if you want that to be part of the report.
And just for folks to understand, when we talk about by email, what it is comments will be going to Catherine and Catherine only. It's not a reply all situation. She'll aggregate the comments, reflect them in the draft, and
okay.
Chris, I'm sorry. Tony has rightfully been muting and unmuting me. It's great power that he has. But I lost where we were on the financial piece. Is there some way we could make sure that the report includes a request for funding? And the question, of course, is how much.
Right.
But if there was a small committee, maybe the governance committee would be willing to come back together on that question.
Yeah, Pat, we
Just 'cause I think
established.
that's something that we could come to consensus on pretty quickly. That should be in this report.
Yeah, Pat, I think that's the intent. And last month we did establish a little finance committee group.
Oh, that's right.
And I think
Sorry.
you're actually on it, but I can't remember.
Oh, yeah.
We'll check the minutes and see.
What was I thinking? No, that's right, Tony, I'm not, so, sorry.
Great, but you can be.
But I mean, Chris, or Jim's point about crossover and, at least getting the financial request in there, and the crossover date's gonna be here before we even know it, so.
Yeah, but as you know, amazing things happen in the big bill on both sides of the crossover. But your point's well taken. We will try and deal with it. Okay. Sorry, we are running late. I will now switch to public comment. If anybody has any comment on anything that they've heard this evening or want to hear about. And I'd ask you just to be as brief as you can. Yes, go ahead.
Why isn't this Vermont?
Mike, can you say your name again?
Mike Mulligan, Hinsdale,
Thank
New
you.
Hampshire. Hinsdale, New Hampshire. Why doesn't Vermont Yankee ask Energy how much is it going to take to decommission the plant in 10 years? Then Vermont stick that in the rate base. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Everyone's frozen.
Yep. The temperature is dropped to absolute zero. All right, I thank you all for your patience. I think we're adjourned for the night, and NRC folks, again, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.